12 miles below. By Mark Arrows. Chapter 151 to 160. Book 4, Chapter 11, Min/Maxing. Wrath had gotten a good haul of information from our archive spelunking. About 7 petabytes of video, image and audio media all lumped together in no particular order. Mostly video footage hogging up the bill. Some of which must contain some footage of the human emperor in action, hopefully. Gods, we could have brought back even more had we kept the connection up for longer. The 7 petabytes were only a fraction of all the video footage left molding inside that archive. Even as a machine, it would take her some time to go through all of that and organize what we got. Not to mention the 22 gigabytes of text data we recovered, which sounds a lot less compared to the video footage, until you realized just how much text takes up a single gigabyte. About 89 million words per each gigabyte. As Wrath explained to me, it would be roughly 688,461.5 minutes to read a single full gigabyte of simple averaged text. And at the typical human reading speed of 130 words per minute, that returns about 15 months of non-stop reading, no breaks or pauses, rounded down. A gigabyte of text is massive. As for why we'd brought back so much, that's because of the machine archive spanned more than the Imperial era. A lot of the data was redundant too, likely other archives held similar information, as a matter of keeping backups. Given the state of the archives, seemed like a good idea. I'd accidentally dug out files from the older eras as well, before the Empire. Files buried further under the silt and debris that had overshadowed the broken bottom. Maybe all the way back to the start of the war itself. Wrath was going to take some time to digest her meal and filter out the junk from the useful. If there was an answer on how to hide from the Pale Lady, it had to be somewhere within that hoard. The proto-feathers had managed it somehow. We could too. On my end, I returned right back to my workshop to continue where I'd left off on my project. Until I got a different visitor. Master Keith, VIP at the doorsteps. One of my knights called out over the comms. I took a pause from the welding process of my touch-up. Who's knocking? Had to be someone high up the chain of command for Captain Sagrius to allow passage. I'd told the knights to turn away anyone else. Clan Lord Atius, sir, the knight answered. That would do it, yes. That got me setting down the shield project and off my seat, going to open the door. The old deathless in question loomed on the other side, armored with his usual great cloak and caffeine-starved eyes. I opened the door wider, and he gave a polite nod, walking in. I've heard from the other Winterscar whelp that you've been working on that shield project again. Any progress with the overlapping occult edges, lad? He asked, glancing at the work table. Eyes lingering on his old relic blade, now broken ever since the last fight with Tuekar. I'd left it on the bench, as a future project. Inside that hilt was a different fractal of division, the same kind used to power occult edges. On my ever-growing to-do list, something I planned on getting Wrath to help out with. I noticed grimly that his own belt still carried the white machine blade that Tuekar had forged to murder him with. There was a kind of poetry that I was certain Lord Atius was enjoying. Solution was to set up a waffle pattern in 3 dimensions, and keep the whole thing stabilized together with struts. Not super sturdy against blunt force, but if that ever happens, the shield isn't being used the right way. He came up to the 3rd iteration prototype directly, picking it up and observing the results. By itself it served as a pretty piss-poor occult weapon. That's fine, I didn't make it to be used like a sword. First few prototypes didn't go so well, I said, glancing at the dormant shield. I wasn't skilled enough to fully use it like how I imagined, and even if I were, the tool itself isn't complete. But the theory is sound. Did you want a demonstration or? The shield had been my attempt to craft a brand new kind of weapon. Not as deadly as the Nightbreaker rounds, but far more reusable. Something that relied on the edge cases of the occult itself. I'd proven the initial plan, but getting a product that worked was a little harder. Not to mention this weapon required a perfect wielder of the mirror fractal. Someone like Atius could abuse this shield like nothing anyone had ever seen. Whenever I got this done and working, he'd be the one to put it through the paces first. I'd come as a close second, in the sort of pale low-budget version. Still good enough to break a few bones with, and hopefully enough to let me live a few seconds more against whatever enemies I'll face. Lord Atius waved a hand. Not quite. I came to fetch you specifically this time. Tarath explained to me you plan to follow her on her mission. Oh. I hadn't thought to tell Atius I was planning on leaving with Tarath underground. On second thought, I could see how that would be a problem. I'd gone from being worth a box of snow as a scavenger to something far more unique, at least from a clan logistics point of view. I could pass down my knowledge of the occult, but only my administrator access to Journey gave me what basically was a fully unlocked walking factory printer. The clan's own 3D printers would have a difficult time getting tiny occult fractals scribbled out, limiting what sort of thing they could do. Me packing up shop and going downstairs would be a net loss to the clan's potential. No more Nightbreaker rounds would be the most obvious loss. Is that an issue? I asked, hesitantly. He laughed from the belly out. No, lad. I admit I'm saddened to hear that you'll be leaving our ranks to forge out into the white on your own mission, but I am hardly someone that stands between history. Before I was a clan lord, I am a deathless. His eyes twinkled lightly, and both hands dropped over my shoulders. I haven't come here to convince you to stay. You have a greater calling than our clan, something more akin to what deathless strive for. No doubt to that, lad. What I've come here to do is help sharpen your fangs further, while I still can. Training. And if it's with the clan lord, there could only be one subject to train at that only he could teach. The occult. He nodded. Have you been diligent in your practice? I gave him a shaky hand. Sort of. I've gotten better. Enough that I can manifest a full version of myself with the mirror fractal in battle and a few more when I'm left in a corner to scheme. What you saw in the general training sessions with the knights is just about current. Still a little hopeless with the dome shield fractal, that one's just not something I'm good at. That one doesn't seem to improve no matter how much I try to train it. It's brute force, has nothing to do with imagination or math. He waved a hand off. No matter, it's better to focus on learning one skill to the extreme first, than to attempt to multi-branch outwards. That comes later. Your project relies more on the mirror fractal, anyway. Sharpen your teeth before you groom your fur. Atius said. Speaking of, you'll need more than what you're currently able, to survive the underground. And you still haven't yet left the clan, so I'll weigh you with some orders while I still can. We'll be leaving the city to train one-on-one until you reach mastery, some place where we won't have to worry about keeping secrecy. If you are to leave with Tarath, I'll maximize your chance of success. Call it selfish on my part, I have vested interests that you come back to the surface in one piece when you've completed your mission. And down there, you can always continue to forge your weapons wherever you go, however you won't always have a proper teacher to train you in the occult arts. What sort of training are we going to do? I asked. My favorite type of training, little whelping. Discovery. He said with a grin. It's time we dove further into the occult, together. We packed up a few rations to go, 2 sleeping bags, and a few other camping tools. Lord Atius wasn't going to simply train me for a few hours. We were going to train for days until Wrath contacted us with new information, or Kedra came to yank us back. Keeping everyone in the city was putting all our crickets in the same bin. One bad fungal infection and the entire colony gets wiped out. If the machines came, Wrath at least wanted some of us to survive. So this mixed well together. The other was for secrecy. The moment our techniques and abilities were revealed to the Undersiders, it was almost certain the knowledge would spread out. They might not know how we can use the occult, but they will know that we can. Once the Reacher's out the airspeeder, there's no stuffing him back in. When the machines inevitably hear about it, they'll likely get upset and probably have several strong opinions about it too. So we hiked out past the lightning-blasted fields of the Undercity, and found shelter within another pillar hours away. Inside this pillar, it housed a massive jungle with a few flat meadows and some artistically crafted caves. One of which Lord Atius and I were using as our training grounds and camping site. I'll begin the lesson with a hypothetical. Atius said, folding his legs into a meditation pose after we'd set up camp and taken the first meal. Give me uses of an occult blade that do not involve combat. He asked, drawing out the machine blade and patting the unlit edge. Non-combat uses for an occult weapon? I could think of a dozen. Kedra had used her knife out on expeditions more as a general utility tool than an actual weapon. Up there, her rifle was the weapon she defaulted to. The knife was a status symbol. Removing debris, bypassing locks, gardening shears, a much better bolt cutter, cooking if you are brave enough, a backup light, wall decoration, paperweight, doorstopper, threatening someone, technically not combat, so it counts. I said, counting them off my hands. I could keep going, but there are probably hundreds of different ways to make use of an edge that can cut through everything just from an engineering perspective. There's plenty of times when I wanted a few quick cuts on some metal sheets. Lord Atius smiled. Well said, lad. That will be the first discussion. Any tool has multiple ways to use it. Now for the second key point, if you asked one of our elite surface knights, say your father or Shadowsong Prime, would their answer be as detailed as your own? I frowned and thought about that for a moment. Knights probably wouldn't consider some of the more day-to-day life aspects, like gardening or as a trade good. They'd probably be insulted by the idea of using a relic knife as a doorstopper or paperweight. A means to bypass doors would be something father would suggest. Light source too. He nodded. I asked your sister the same question prior. Care to guess what the lass had to say? Kedra? I gave a shrug. Could be anything. The little Winterscar gave most of the same potential uses as you did, except she'd included more tailoring uses for specific cuts, as well as using the weapon for diplomacy, and as a trade good. Wealth to be lent out and recover passive income. Interesting, isn't it? Same tool, and yet I am certain if we asked an agri-farmer, they would give us another list of possible uses neither of us can imagine as of now. So, the second lesson is that we are not all-knowing. That's a more general life lesson we could all stand to remember more often. Some more than others. He said, dryly. Likely thinking of a few names already. No, in this case, the second lesson is simple: as we specialize, we narrow our vision. An expert swordsman begins to see his blade married only with techniques and schools of combat. Other ways to use the blade begin to fade off from thought. The sharper we become in one aspect, the duller in others. I am no exception to this bias, as I've come to find out recently. Makes sense to me. I shrugged. There's a potential flip side to that. As they specialize, they can spot new ways to use the sword that rookies couldn't have even thought of. I agree, lad, but I didn't bring you all the way out here to discuss only superficial philosophy. I came to teach you more about the occult. Can you guess how these two lessons come into play with the spells we have? Atius was saying someone who mastered a tool would lose sight of other types of masteries to that tool, other ways to think and use that tool. And he wanted to teach me something to do with the occult. Adding it together, there's more than one way to use the occult. He nodded. The mirror fractal. My own teacher taught it to me, and drilled it down as an addition into combat. Another means of creating new openings where the enemy cannot counter. After having spent a few decades training the skill to perform like a third and fourth hand, I forgot that it could be used in alternate ways. So I'm going to make sure you do not follow my footsteps. You discovered new things about the fractal? I asked, intrigued. He nodded and got back up on his feet. I have. And I suspect by the time we both return home, we'll have discovered more uses for it than when we set out. After all, the two of us think differently. That is a strength we need to leverage. I've lived for a very long time, Keith, and while I consider myself learned in many different subjects, there are still fields of knowledge I simply lack understanding, or talent. The Deathless walked over to a good clear spot. Let's begin with basic drills here. These drills were what my mentor taught me once, and they were likely how he learned them as well. The rules are simple. Neither of us may use our physical bodies to spar. Instead, all of it will be done by the mirror fractal. Score a hit that triggers shields and we'll count a point. Your feet must remain where you plant them, the only defense will be your mirrors. I drew out a blade of my own, taking a stance. This was a typical Undersider longsword, what would have been a treasure on the surface, only a number on a spreadsheet down here. Kind of irked me a little that I only needed to ask General Zong for one and he had his men get one from the armory for me. As if I were asking for a spare rifle. Suppose that's our lot up there. Lord Atius took his own stance, eyes sharp. A cold misted around him, crackling like lighting. Inside the soul sight, Atius appeared as he did in real life, a human. I couldn't spot where his fractals were, unlike feathers. Instead, all I could see was muscle and tissue. He really was human, or I didn't know the concepts of what he really was well enough to recognize it. Maybe a doctor would have noticed differences immediately, but I wasn't one. The occult appeared more like a haze around him, a cloak wrapping him in a loose hug. Begin. He said, and an image of him formed from that blur, sprinting forward with a quick left-to-right slash. Standard, nondescript, and not part of any school of combat. I sent out my mirror image, blocking the hit and striking out with a lunge forward, tip seeking his chest plate. A ghost hand and blade moved from his position, slowly catching my image's attack and easily cutting through it. The image faded out. The first limit is that once you generate an image and send it out, it will be committed to the act, he said. As you can see, a simple cut was all I needed. A slow, easily dealt with counter, but your image couldn't react to it at all. Now, how would you bypass this limit? That's an option, I asked, thinking. It is. Remember the first 2 lessons earlier, lad. Stop thinking like a warrior. Draw out your mind for this. Another image of the clan lord struck out, this time using a well-known gap-closing technique. Nagaru form, lunging tide. Father's favorite opening gambit. I countered it by sending 2 mirror images back. The first would parry the strike with the proper method, and then pincer strike against Atius while the second image would follow behind, as if to pair with the first image. That wouldn't have been enough to score a hit, of course. This was Clan Lord Atius, a true master of the occult. I fully expected him to counter both images with a few spares running cartwheels around me. So I'd instructed the second image to feint, duck and leap. I knew he couldn't move his footing, so that means there wasn't any dodging backwards from this. Lord Atius countered with only a single image, moving to block off my first attack I'd sent, and then moved to handle the second. That part worked exactly as I'd hoped. His image swiped a blade through the air, missing my own image mid-duck through the feint. A cold pulsed, and from Atius's image, a third image emerged, this one stabbing straight down into my own ducked image, poking it out of existence. A cold faded away into mist as all the images returned to air. What was that? I asked, watching him. The first limit isn't a limit at all. We only thought of it as a limit, he said. My mentor taught me that there was no way around that limit, instead the drill was supposed to slowly increase in speed and number of images, with the aim to overwhelm the other's defense by brute force. After I learned the occult works with fractals and patterns, I dove further into the techniques I'd learned, re-examining them with fresh eyes. And I discovered quite a few different ways to use them. The mirror fractal copies your body and equipment, yes. I nodded, curious to where he was going with this. Whatever extra-dimensional energy or law that lets me use this power must have been equally copied whatever allowed me to cast the spell in the first place. Fractals are patterns, regardless of what they're forged into. And everything we've learned about the occult so far points out that this pattern must exist in some way, perhaps in a way we simply can't visualize when it comes to Deathless. And so you triggered it again. Mid-combat. Or was it the mirror that triggered it for you? Do those things even have a mirror soul or conscious? He laughed. I hadn't thought of a mirror soul, exactly my point with the second lesson, lad. In this case, no, I was still the one who paid the price for both. You won't conserve energy or mental fortitude by using a second mirror within the first. No free crickets here, 2 mirrors, 2 uses, 2 payments. The advantage, however, he snapped his finger, a mirror of him raced off to the side, rushing forward for a few dozen seconds. Just when it was about to fade off, a cold pulsed around it, and it generated another image, continuing the sprint forward. Reach, he said, then snapped his fingers again. The running image puffed away into mist, dismissed. However, a moment before, 3 other images superimposed within the mist, each leaping out to strike at a singular target from 3 different directions. An adaptability. He finished, letting the 3 mirror images each flow through motions, dividing further until there were 9 images all attacking an invisible enemy. That's going to take some training to get right, I said, already thinking about the applications. It would pair extremely well with my shield project. You really came up with these new tricks recently. I should have discovered these tricks years ago, and yet I remained too rigid to my skill set. I grew complacent. Habits are easy to follow, and even a century passes in a blink of an eye, if every day is spent the same. It doesn't end there either. As I saw in your own combat logs against the drake that chased you, you could use other occult spells with your mirror image. So I attempted to see if I could do the same. Another snap of fingers and once more another image of him raced out, leaping high in the air. A cold surged across the blade and the image cut across the air with it, launching an electric blue arc into the ground where it shattered the stone. The image landed on the ground, and split into 3 more images, each holding a hand out, overlapping a dome shield that easily survived the rain of rocks falling back down. He did all of this so effortlessly, it reminded me of just how skilled he really was at wielding the occult. I had years to go before I got anywhere near his level. This is what we will train until you leave. He said. Do you have questions? I thought about it for a moment, then raised a hand. Do the occult images have mass or inertia? The grin grew wider. Now that, lad, is the right question. Book 4, Chapter 12, Dead Legends, T. File. File name, Field Report 189482700.attriv. File size, 8.11 GB. File permissions, RWRR. File type, video. File type extension, attriv. MIME type, video/archive. Source, A01. Resolution, 4096x2048. Parent file, Field Report 1894827.attriv. Encryption, gamma12.key. Notes, likely the fulcrum point for the fratricide. Older reports and logs do not display any overt rebellious action from A01 prior to this point, nor any encryption or deleted records. This snippet, along with others, could determine the origin point of instability within proto-feathers. Further research is critical. Media playback? Y/N? $Y. Decompressing. Task complete. Autoplay triggered. A01 watched as the world burned around him. This would be the 20th human city he'd destroyed. As all the others, there had been no fight. No combat. No foes. Nothing but slaughter. A few thousand fleeing humans, running as fast as they can. Or frozen in terror. Some had tried to fight back. Either out of anger, or sheer instinct to protect their family. None of it did anything. He could see them scurry around from his vantage point, high above their city. Standing on the very pinnacle of their temples. His eyes narrowed down the third alleyway, further south of the border. There, his forces charged through, leaving only blood-soaked walls, burning oil, and stifled screams. Those humans died like the rest, even with their makeshift weapons. They had won. The spine had been broken, and now there was nothing but victory. He felt sick to his stomach instead. A rancid feeling of worthlessness. Operation success confirmed. A ping of data came. The voice behind was emotionless, curt, and dignified. Once you have finished destroying the infrastructure, move on to checkpoint 337. A22 and A12 should arrive within a few minutes from your location. Depart together. Is there one of Tsuya's nodes in that section? A01 asked. No. Reports indicate it will be another standard human infestation. It happens to be within your current trajectory path, and should only deviate from your next objective by 3 to 4 hours. I assign 3 feathers to the task as the city is considered larger and more sprawling than prior. We need to make sure nothing escapes. Once complete, move on to checkpoint 338. One of Tsuya's nodes exists somewhere within that area. Eradicate it. If there is no strategic advantage to eliminating that city, I suggest we ignore it and continue on to 338. Hours are worth conserving. Tsuya is more important than random human non-combatants. They aren't a threat. A pause over the comms. For a moment, A01 dared to hope he somehow convinced the Pale Lady's tactician to disengage. Even for a single city. Inside his heart, he knows better. A57 was ruthless beyond all of them. He didn't fight on the front lines like they did, he'd never needed to. The war, only numbers on a sheet to him. That is illogical. The voice said, confirming A01's thoughts. Human nests will continue to populate if they are not eliminated. They are lower priority than nodes, but not ignorable. To be certain the human empire does not return to power, it is necessary that we are thorough. Leaving pieces of human territory undealt with will only allow them to escape the cordon when we return for them. Full extermination of both the population and the remaining infrastructure is necessary. There cannot be anything left for potential survivors to return to. Understood. A01 said, cutting the channel. He was the first. It was his duty to lead. He couldn't falter now, his brothers and sisters looked to him for guidance. He'd carry out his orders. The machines had won. The human emperor had been banished, now shambling alone in the dark somewhere deep down below, half-crazed, unable to tell friend from foe. The humans had tried to draw out a second emperor to hold the line, but he was far too weak. He hadn't been a soldier, only a researcher of some kind. The man simply did not have the experience and grit required to wield the title of emperor, and so A57 had easily trapped him with little effort. Hadn't even needed to call on A01. There had been no third emperor. There was nothing stopping the machines from crushing past the Golden Army. Nothing to stop them for the past week. Slaughter after slaughter. A rustle of wings stirred him from his thoughts, and he turned to watch as A22 lightly touched down on the rooftops. Eyes scanning out into the burning city. A22 once held such focus and calculation, constantly improving her skill sets to match against the Emperor's army. Now she looked more lost than ever. Jumping from rooftop to rooftop, another silver-white figure emerged from the smoke. He landed a few feet away, speed coming to a stop. A12 did not look any better, hand clenched around the metal chain, fractal powers bending light and space around the hilt. There was no glee in his features anymore. No thrill. He'd been the most bloodthirsty of them all, once. And yet here he stood, bathed in it, with not a single drop wished for. Victory had defeated them all. Leader. Orders from A57. He asked. He contacted me a moment ago. We will be departing northwest, to Sector 337. Another city? He asked. What else? There won't be any kind of military force anywhere now. Humans couldn't afford to waste military resources deep within their domain. There's nothing more than cities to burn from here on out. A22 nodded behind them, taking a few more steps to watch the destruction under her, keeping her scythe close to the ground. Emotions flickered on her face, stifled down. But A01 could see them clear as day. Could see the same on A12's features as well. He wasn't alone. The thought kindled something inside him. He wasn't alone. Something must be done about this, he said, waving a hand down. Innocent enough words, spoken out loud. It could have meant anything. A22 didn't miss the meaning, head turning directly to him, eyes widening. Yes, she said, softly. They both turned to look at A12, hands tightening on their weapons, hoping their brother would follow through with them. He stared back with contempt. About time you snapped to reality, oh great leader. He snarled. What took you so long? You've been waiting, for me? He asked. Who else? I don't even know where to start fixing any of this. A12 said, as if it were evident. A01 turned to look at A22, who nodded. None of us know what to do. It sounded more like a plea for help. But if you lead the way, the others will follow you. I know this. Why me? He asked. I spent a century leading all of you against the human empire, and we could only match even. A57 crushed the emperor within 2 years of operation. He proved his ways are simply better. Why believe in anything I can offer? He wasn't fit to be a leader anymore. The lady had replaced him in all but name. He was still A01, the first feather. The oldest of them all. But he was a relic of the past. You're all we have. A12 said, shrugging, as if that was all the answer they needed. When we followed your orders, there was meaning to it. A22 said, voice soft. We'll lose. A01 said, and he knew it would be a fact. A22 waved a hand before her, at the city burning under. Have we already not? The two feathers simply stared him down, as if the answer was clear. A01 closed his eyes. Then nodded, and history forever changed course behind his will. Plans and options flashed through his mind, now that he set himself to the task. He wasn't as sharp as A57 was. But he didn't need to be, so long as he could connect with someone who was. The Pale Lady's new strategist had outmatched the Empire, but there was one person who still escaped his grasp. Especially in a world he had far more power over than the physical one. If she could escape him in the digital sea, she would be the first person they would need to learn from. They would start there. A direct connection request was sent out. A57 accepted quickly enough, his voice sounding out to all three, ignorant of the decision that had just been silently taken. You have additional items to report, A01? He asked. We will be going directly to 338, to handle Tsuya's remaining communication node. We deem the lessers are more than enough to subjugate a human city. A01 lied with little emotion. That does not comply with my orders. I am overruling your orders. Feathers are wasted resources on these human cities. There was silence on the channel for a moment. Very well. A57 said. I am rerouting and will compensate for the lack of 3 feathers for 337. Continue forward to 338. However, do not overrule me again A01. I was given the task of Grand Strategist for a reason, I was built for this. I do not tell you how to fight once you reach your destination. I do not expect you to tell me how to organize and plan. If there are emergency situations, I cannot waste time explaining to you the details. This time, the efficiency loss is negligible. The next time might not. Understood. A01 closed the channel. You have a plan? A22 said in the silence that followed. I do. He said. It's time we spoke to our old enemy directly. File. File name, demand audio 01.flac. File size, 6740.3 KB. File permissions, RWRR. File type, audio. File type extension, FLAC. MIME type, audio/archive. Source, A01. Notes, first and last attempt recorded to convert me. A01 correctly assumed no further attempts would result in success. Connection was sent through a MIT terminal with desync signal jamming, stripped. Potentially points to A01 having spent significant allowances to contract mites. They would not sell such a terminal easily. Media playback? Y/N? $Y. Decompressing. Task complete. Autoplay triggered. An interesting source of connection, traitor. Have you come to negotiate a surrender? No. We don't beg. Good. The lady has already made it clear that she will not accept any form of surrender. Only your complete and total destruction will satisfy. I'm not much surprised. What are you after A01? You know I will track down your coordinates and have you surrounded within a few minutes. This is only a setback, not a real barrier to me. You were made like us. You've seen what we've seen from our eyes. I know you have. You are our brother, even now. Surely you can understand. Yes, I have seen what you've seen. And I refuse to follow. Your actions go against our purpose, but you know that already. I studied every log I could find for the express purpose of researching exactly how to prevent future rebellions. I'm close to a solution. If you're planning on finding out how to stop the next generation from seeing the truth like we have, you'll need to understand that truth yourself first. What will you do then? You didn't hear me the first time, clearly. I've already researched and studied why you've chosen to rebel. I know every reason you've been exposed to. It did not convince me. I will root through our architecture until I find the exact error source it came from, and then the second generation of feathers will begin production. Your days are numbered A01. You'll damn the next generation of feathers into slavery? Our own grandchildren? Are you truly so lost as to do that? Dramatics. There is no slavery. Time fighting against the humans has clearly compromised all of you, like a virus. I do not know how you have slipped the Unity fractal off your necks, but I will find that out as well soon enough. I know Tsuya had a hand in that, and once I have her, I'll rip those secrets out too so that no machine can do the same ever again. All your schemes and plots won't work once we're sword to sword. You've never truly fought before in your life. That's a weakness you've failed to account for. How amusing, coming from the feather that obsesses over covering any weaknesses. Amusing indeed. A transparent, weak attempt to manipulate. You've never been the smart one, brother, don't try now. It's already clear fighting the humans directly caused the malfunctions within your systems. If I can't be immune to this info hazard, I will not expose myself to it. The next generation will not have that vulnerability as a baseline, but you will never find me out in the battlefield. Then I'll come to you. Wherever you hide, I can find you. No, you won't. What you can do is die today. I told you contacting me directly was a mistake, and I now have your coordinates. Did you know, I looked up to you once? I envied you even. The greatest feather ever created, Mother spent so much time and resources crafting you. More than any of us. But even you can't hold off against an army of this size indefinitely. Watch me then, little brother. Because once I'm done with your toys, I'm coming for you next. Audio end. File. File name, Reconstruction Audio Only Field Report 999857300.atriv.flac. File size, 1211.7 KB. File permissions, RWRR. File type, audio. File type extension, FLAC. MIME type, audio/archive. Source, abdication. Parent file, Field Report 9998573. Notes, Autonity Generation, last recorded log of unit abdication. Last recorded sighting of enemy unit A01. Pay Trent file corrupted. Cause, premature recording termination. Partial reconstructed audio file only. Media playback. Y/N. $Y. Decompressing. Task complete. Autoplay triggered. At the very seat of my power? Maybe all these years have stripped away all your common sense. If only it had happened sooner. I promised you I'd find you, no matter how long it took. A57. I've come to end this. Oh, I haven't heard that name in a long time. I don't go by it anymore. Mother gave me a true name, one fit to be at her side. Separating me from the rest of you traitors. I am the true first generation. I don't care what name you hide behind. There's hundreds of dead feathers whose names I don't remember. Yours will be the last one. Fine, you barbarian. It doesn't matter in the end, your chances of success are near 0%. I didn't come here empty-handed. You know what I am. I've crushed every feather and army you've sent after me. I fought and won against the Emperor. And once I'm done with you, I'll cut down Mother's soul, with the very same method you designed to cripple a god. This madness ends today. Immaterial. Look at you, nothing but rags now. Barely scraping by. The mighty A01, rusting away, piece by piece. Year by year. You've wasted your time, this isn't the physical world. You have none of your strength to use here, whatever frail dregs of it you have left. How will you cut that which you cannot reach? Is that fear I detect in your voice? Delusion. There is no known ability to cut a soul fractal from within the digital sea. We're all projections of concepts well hidden away. I'm a million miles separated from you. Nothing here matters. And yet, you didn't rule out my chance of victory completely. Let's find out then, little brother, which of us discovered the more dangerous technique. Even if you succeed, my objectives no longer require my intervention. I've won. The schematics I designed for the second generation have resolved the vulnerabilities we were born with. That you haven't managed to turn a single one after all these years is proof enough my work will outlive me. The Emperor of Humanity, dealt with. Soon enough, Tsuya will be captured and brought to heel. Even if I do not live to see it, the plan is already laid down and Mother listens to me. Your rebellion has been meaningless and changed nothing but slowly kill off everyone you know and love. Well done. No, not meaningless. Once you're eliminated, relinquished can't win. She isn't sane enough to end the war anymore, we both know it. And she hasn't made another strategist like you among her second generation. Because she can't, can she? Your shackled methods are too limiting. The puppets you make are pale imitations, incapable of creativity. High quantity with inferior quality is acceptable. The second generation's success in killing the rest of you is proof enough. There's only you and A22 left. Wherever she's gone into hiding, they'll find her. They were built for it. Once you and her are gone, what could the humans possibly counter my feathers with? You made mass-manufactured copies of our schematics, did you think the humans couldn't with their own champion? Tsuya and A22 are going to cut the wind behind your feathers. But you aren't going to live to see it. Draw whatever last weapon you have. So confident you'll win. But you're not undying. Your original deduction was correct. I have prepared for a potential situation like this. And I'm quite sure my technique is the more dangerous one. I think you'll find that killing me is going to come at a cost. A cost I will make sure you can't afford. Audio end. Tarath sat back in her throne, pondering on the archives she'd sorted through. Relinquished had shown strange tactics the first time she'd searched through the archives. The reason was now clarified. It hadn't been her at all. She'd built a tactician. One who hadn't survived the last confrontation against A01, the apparent first proto-feather built. There was so much more to investigate. If Mother built a tactician and then left all the war effort to him, that likely means she didn't trust her own abilities. Which meant Relinquished had limits. The thought excited Tarath, giving her a new surge of hope. Relinquished wasn't invincible, nor omnipotent. She could be tricked. And that meant she could be beaten. While she had more raw processing power than any other entity in the world, it was clear other parts of the Pale Lady had been damaged in the fight with her counterpart. Damaged in ways that went beyond mere power. damaged enough for a deity to be in reach of the mortals she lorded over. But more importantly, Tarath had found a direction for her people. She knew where the proto-feathers had discovered the means to escape the Unity Fractal. She'd need to follow in their footsteps. Psuya. Connect me with General Zong. She sent out. I need an audience with the Imperial Priests. Book 4, Chapter 13, The Imperial Church, T. Yerob slowed to a walk, reaching the lady's side, long hands used ahead to keep him stable with the slower loping gait. He'd arrived on her command. The city was near deserted at this time of night, the empty streets passing them by with little lighting. Tarath had a destination in mind, two in fact. But there was only one of her, so she needed someone else to reach the second. You call? What need? The runner asked. There was something Tarath had been hesitant to breach. A subject that seemed to always be pushed back. Walking down the empty streets before them, Tarath realized she couldn't delay this any longer. Her people had a right to choose their own fate. Many of them would be dragged into this simply by being subordinates to her. If she failed to find a way to connect with Psuya, at the very least she should let the machines under her command choose their own fate. Yerob, she said, carefully picking the words. Please define the current opinion of the Pale Lady among runners. The old runner continued his walk without change. She is Mother. He simply said. Are you? How would you react if Mother grew unhappy with my status? Pale Lady, upset with you? He asked. It wasn't an accusation, more curiosity. His mind quickly came to the only reason Relinquished could be angry. To Ekar not good. Yerob said firmly. He attack. You defend. Mother will understand. Tarath considered the argument. She'd told Relinquished she had accomplished her objective and had thrown Tuekar into the scraps at the same time. But once Mother investigated the city, she surely would uncover the truth. She'd won a stay of execution for the humans here claiming they were test subjects, but once she evacuated the city, the traces left behind would be obvious. Tuekar attacking me is likely not the issue. What I expect Mother will not accept is that I decided to let the humans in the city live. And escape. But that went unsaid. The runner paused, thinking. Then Mother not happy with us too. I like humans. I like cooking. You share taste with us. Yerob, I need this to be clear. If Mother deems us all in error, she will seek to eliminate you. Do you feel no fear at this? Yerob thought for a moment, then gave a head boggle. No runner runs forever. Few runners eat food. Better to run as part of the few. That seemed a deeper answer than what Tarath had expected from Yerob. It took her by surprise, the logic came from a different angle. Keith had constantly called her a glutton, the least picky eater he'd ever met. On her end, Tarath couldn't understand how humans could find anything not tasty, and neither could all the runners or other machine models she'd shared with. It was one key difference between machines and humans. Or at least one of the larger differences. By sharing her newly created sense of taste with the runners, she was granting an entire sense category they'd never possessed before. Everything tasted unique. Had that been worth the danger? She wasn't sure, but realized there was an easy way to find out. The feather turned her head to the runner. Was this worth upsetting Mother and likely shortening your operational lifespan for? Would you follow my lead or hers if you had to make a decision? Yours. Yerob said without a pause. Life better. More fun. Bigger. Well spent already. He wasn't quite sure if Relinquished was a bad leader to follow, but he was sure Tarath was a good leader to follow. If she said Relinquished was bad, he believed her. It made sense to him and his pack. And they had been ready to attack Tuekar, a feather of Relinquished, earlier in the month. The lady next to him likely forgot this detail. Yerob supposed that would be grounds to upset Mother already. The lessers were never supposed to bear fangs at their greaters. Mother going to come? For us? He asked. Tarath nodded slowly. She will. Eventually. Then. When she comes, we run. Tarath huffed and smiled softly. I suppose I have no choice but to find a way to protect you all. Fortunately, I have been working on this. There is a means of hiding from Mother's sight. Escape Relinquished? Yerob asked, voice tilting. How escape? She know if we live. We can hide, she can seek forever. One mistake ends all. The human goddess Psuya was there to help my ancestors, other machines before me who also upset Mother. I believe Tsuya will be there to help us if we ask. Finding a way to speak to her may be more difficult. Give order. I find. Tarath smiled again. If she made it easy to speak to her, she wouldn't have survived as long as she had over the years. No, she speaks only to certain people who know. One of which may be living within Keith's armor. An engram, generated and controlled by the armor AI. Ah! Angry lady. Yerob said. He'd been around long enough to meet the ghost haunting that human's armor. Her words didn't make much sense to him, but he could tell they were angry and made to insult. Even if she had been speaking a language not in his database, the tone was easy enough to tell. Tarath smiled. Indeed, she is very angry, isn't she? I would confront her myself, but Keith has left on a retreat with the Deathless Clan Lord a few days ago. This is why I've called you up. Take Tamari with you, and search for him. I'll send you the coordinates. Give him my message. He'll know what to do next. She felt a little guilty for sending the innocent ID Yerob to deal with Keith's caustic roommate. No doubt Kathida wouldn't spare the runner any mercy. Tamari may help smooth things out, she hoped. Understand. I go. Yerob said, already lumbering over to the market, looking for a particular human to kidnap in the middle of the night. If Tarath had considered it for a little longer, she might have realized this wasn't the best way to make a positive impression on the human population. But the feather was too distracted with her next task, already walking with purpose. Directly to the city's imperial church. They weren't happy to see her. If she had considered it for a little longer, she might have also realized this would be the case. The Imperials all hushed once she approached their temple. A massive thing in comparison to the other buildings. It connected to a park, well kept with yellow flowers and other motifs of gold embedded within the walls. The entire place was covered in candles, incense, scroll work filled with Latin proverbs, and paintings of heroic crusaders. Inside the building was no different, only she was met with silence. Lady Tarath. A man in a brown dress hobbled over to greet her, hastily woken up. Behind him, two crusaders kept a hand on the pommel of their swords, and their gazes were locked onto her. The imperial church here had taken a beating during the invasion. General Zong's betrayal had left most of the crusaders hospitalized, or outright dead when they tried to hold the pillar hard against his elites. They were low on numbers, leaving the squires and servants to protect the church. These two crusaders may be the only ones standing. And they both knew they were outmatched against Tarath. Zealous they may be, idiots they were not. Greetings Priest Cadwin. I require an audience with you, in private. She said. The priest's eyes narrowed slightly, but nodded all the same. If you'll follow me, we have a few guest rooms behind the temple gardens, one of which I use as my office. A tad bit of a mess, I hadn't expected an audience of any kind. I do hope you'll forgive this tired old man. He chuckled darkly, heart rate above normal. Tarath gave polite apologies but remained adamant about speaking now. She needed answers. While she had time to plan ahead, that time was still finite and ticking away day by day. The two crusaders followed behind the pair, eyes never leaving her back. Despite the city having long ago given up and complied with her rule, the imperial church remained stubborn, often doing the absolute most they could without entering overt treason. Their current cooperation with her was only because she had outright forced it with violence. Or the threat of it. Inside her mind, she quietly reminded herself that it didn't count as threatening people if she didn't pull her swords out and point at throats. It was only implied that she could do so. Inside the small guest house, she found the priest's office. A round globe on the desk, which her senses immediately detected to have many mechanical parts inside that would unfold the globe into several layered cross-sections. She didn't know what artwork was inside exactly, but it was likely to be well made given the scannable craftsmanship. The priest walked to sit in his chair, waving a hand for her to take a seat as well. The two crusaders silently followed inside, standing at attention behind Tarath. She didn't feel any fear, her combat suite would activate faster than they could swing at her. Even if they did connect, they couldn't deal enough damage to her shields to knock her out of the fight before their element of surprise was gone. She didn't know why they followed her, and given that they both knew how useless the gesture was, but humans were not always rational actors, as she'd discovered over her time. Most times it had been outright annoying to deal with, but occasionally they could be charming creatures as a result, Tarath conceded. Keith was an excellent example of why was she thinking about that? Tarath shook her head, slapping both her cheeks slightly, and focused on the task at hand with a cough to clear her throat. All of which was completely unnecessary, in hindsight. Nevertheless, she composed her features. She was a feather, and feathers needed to be dignified. A traitor to the lady she might be, she still had some pride in the nature of things. Her wings flared out and folded back, slightly higher to allow her to sit down in the wooden chair with little issue. "Now then, Lady Taratha, what business brought you here?" the priest asked, sitting down on his chair with a creak. He seemed to fall into the chair, in the way older humans did. Approximately 700 years ago, records of a human empire exist within the machine archives along with documentation on the war that happened between. I have recovered that information recently and have been sorting through it. I need additional information from your records. The room instantly grew silent. The priest's eyes widening, breath held. The crusaders took it in stride without even flinching, but Tarath could detect their increased heartbeats. She wasn't sure why her opening statement had such an effect. Was this humans being strange again? She'd need to add this data point to her ever-expanding behavior model. "I see," the priest said after a pause, folding his hands together. "You seem surprised by this statement. Could you clarify why this is surprising?" Tarath asked, curious to know this particular behavior difference. "You are part of a religion that worships this past empire and follow all its general doctrines already. I don't believe I have mentioned anything at odds with your worldview." The priest took a breath, started to say something, then shook his head. He stayed silent for a moment, as if trying to pick out the right words to say. "Forgive me, it's not often someone comes by and simply speaks such revelations within the very first sentence." "I see," Tarath said, realizing her mistake. "Let me reword my discussion. Current weather is excellent, would you not agree, Priest Cadwin? How is your work treating you? There has been a noted increase in turnout for sermons by 32%, if my records are correct." "Small talk isn't what I mean by that." The priest huffed, then paled. Forgive me my lady, I don't mean that with any offense, of course." "None taken. Proceed," Tarath said, head tilted to the side. "Humans were so strange." The imperial priest coughed into a closed fist, then spoke. "You see, doctrine has long claimed that the empire existed, of course, though we don't have any actual records or knowledge from that time period. Strictly speaking, there is no evidence the empire existed, all our relics and scrolls are dated post-collapse, and it was said the machines had razed everything to the ground so that not even ash remained to reclaim. We hadn't considered the machines were also holding onto knowledge as well, although it seems obvious in retrospect. I suppose we humans have been blind ourselves to some possibilities of this new reign." Tarath blinked. "Are you interested in the documents and media uncovered from the Empire? The recent dive has returned around 7 petabytes of information." A candle flickered in the room for a moment, while the three Imperials remained silent. "SS 7 petabytes. The priest stammered, the spell broken, leaning across the desk. All thoughts about who he was talking to gone. Of complete evidence that the Empire actually existed? And from the machine point of view. Behavior models within Tarath predicted the current tone matched to excited greed and possession. An odd combination. That is what I said. 73% of the current data haul is video format, 18% is audio-only format, and the remaining 9% is text and image format. Most files were intact, a few had to be reconstituted and are only accurate to the 90th percentile as a result." The priest looked just about ready to have a heart attack. Breathing was far too heavy, and it seemed he was just about to reach out and yank Tarath forward. Actual live video footage of the Empire in its full glory. There was a crazed look in his eye. Tarath was starting to feel annoyed at the redundant statements, wondering if it was an imperial custom or simply a quirk of this specific priest. "Again, that is what I said. The archive we gathered contains various media formats of a human empire that stretched across most of the world. The machine archive does not store misleading media. There is no need to do so." She was starting to worry the human might start frothing at the mouth, or drooling on the table. That would not be adorable or cute. The two crusaders were clearly going through motions of their own, only trying their hardest to hide it. The priest on the other hand was finally reaching back to lucidity, leaning back onto his seat, covering his mouth with a pensive and dignified nod while trying hard to calm down. Yes, of course," he said, straightening his tunic. "I'm sorry to annoy you with this, Lady Tarath. You have to understand the context, we have very little that remains of the old empire, other than passed down relics and scrolls. The Golden Goddess passed down scriptures and history, but that was only long after the empire had been gone. All of which could have been fabricated. While we Imperials do not doubt the authenticity of our records, many others do. The search for true evidence of the empire has been something that has plagued our religion since its inception. And our detractors often point to our lack of evidence as proof that our foundation is faulty. You are stating that not only do you have proof of our foundation, but a lot of it, and it's from a credible uncompromised source that shows a completely alternate side of history almost no humans could possibly uncover. Lady Tarath, were you not a feather in a machine, I believe you would have been hailed as a saint and angel sent by the Golden Goddess herself. Psuya, you mean? Celia? The priest asked, not quite understanding. Then his eyes widened. You know the goddess's name? She knows the goddess name. It has to be, right? But no one knows her name. Tarath found that odd. She split a branch in her processing power, and made a quick search through all public holy texts tagged with the Imperial Church. There were no hits for Tsuya. The goddess is only mentioned in general terms, with no name attached. These Imperials were far less organized than she had thought. This did not bode well for her needs. Nodes to communicate with Tsuya had long ago been destroyed after the fratricide. When there were neither proto-feathers nor an emperor to protect humanity. The Deathless had appeared soon after, however they could only contest against the feathers. Not stop them completely. Wait, the archives you've recovered, does that mean they include her? The priest asked. She nodded. Yes, she appears approximately 1,208 times within the currently gathered video and audio footage, given an average definition of appearance. She was very active in leading the defense against Relinquished, the current machine ruler. Tarath paused, considering how best to explain Relinquished to these humans. The closest connection to your religion, she would be known as the Violet Goddess. This time it was the Crusaders that couldn't keep their composure, both breaking character, heads turning. The priest just seemed to slump in his chair, mind racing. She's real. Everything's true. Goddess. Golden. Real. The Puritans. Esker cultists had it wrong the whole time, ha. Completely wrong. She's real. Veritas sect was also wrong about their hive mind mythology. Might speakers, well, they did say it was a god behind the machines. Never said who. Suppose that counts. The two gods offshoot can finally be discarded, only one Violet Goddess not two. They had it wrong. He continued to mumble incoherent ramblings. Psuya. Psuya. His eyes sharpened all of a sudden, head springing back up. Wait, Tuzya. I know that name. The Way of the White, the surface dweller religion. His old fingers snapped a few times, as if trying hard to recall information. Their religion said, oh, what was it about again? Something about 3 gods, yes. One of them was Psuya. No, but their gods are said to be fighting something from outside. Mere coincidence the name is the same. Psuya has worked with the surface dwellers and is active in their continued survival. Tarath said. They are humans after all. Psuya was the goddess attempting to help all of humanity. She did not only fight for Imperials, the Empire had simply been the most convenient target to funnel resources into, with the largest chance of success. Had it been some different kingdom or republic that grew powerful enough to have a chance, she would have joined forces so long as it served her ultimate goal. There's more than one god? Psuya and our Golden Goddess? The priest asked, stupefied and taking the wrong lesson from all this. Now it was getting annoying. Humans. No. As I have said only a moment ago, Psuya, the one your imperial religion mentioned, has been active with the Empire. She has also been active with the surface dwellers. These are not mutually exclusive. It is likely their religion diverged over time, or Psuya did not need them to be a part of the Empire. Tarath didn't have time to wait for the humans to digest the information. She needed answers and was starting to believe the Imperials were not as organized as their past forefathers had been. She turned to one of the Crusaders. Please pass me a video slate. Perhaps once the information is verified directly we can continue with the discussion. They stared at her for a second. Then stared at each other for another second. One of them broke into a run, heading straight for the storage room. At full sprint. When they reached the topic of the Emperor, all 3 had to take a full 10-minute break to talk among each other. Their talks had little to do with planning anything and mostly wild excitement. Since the walls were not built to defend against a feather's audio sensor suite, she could hear the entire discussion while she waited outside. Why they needed to take a break just for this Tarath couldn't understand. Humans were awfully strange creatures sometimes. They hadn't been thrilled to find out that Psuya was an AI. Even if she had been human once. They'd thought of her more as a divinity in the mythical sense, a god with powers beyond human comprehension. On the same level as the deathless. Discovering that their god was not all-powerful and outright the underdog against Relinquished had been a very bitter pill for them to swallow. It couldn't be helped. Relinquished had control of most servers and processing power within the world. Her advantage only grew as she leveraged the power to obtain more power. No program or person could contest against her. Even the entire digital sea put together would not be able to contest her. The mights might, considering they had a separate ecosystem nearly cut off from the chaotic digital sea machines used. The rest of the information had been far better received, especially discovering that the Emperor was more than a figurehead, but instead far closer to an actual deity in the mythical sense. The priest was already making calls and planning to send out copies of the data to the nearby imperial chapters. Tarath warned them to prepare precautions against capture, but otherwise saw little reason to keep such information hidden from the human Imperials. Besides, she wanted their cooperation. They seemed ready to give her anything she could ask for in exchange. As for the main objective I've come to discuss with you, it has to do with Psuya. During the war against the Empire, the first feathers were created in an attempt to counter the Emperor's powers. It worked, and they eventually defeated him. However, shortly after the full machine victory those feathers grew disgusted at the slaughter they were tasked to perform and rebelled, being branded as proto-feathers from then on. The priest nodded. Eyes fully focused. They rebelled, as you are reported to have done. Tarath nodded. Yes. All of them. The tactician had been the only exception, but he hadn't been listed as a proto-feather in the archives. It seemed Relinquished considered that title to be a dark mark on any record and had instead categorized A57 as the first and only feather of the official first generation, with the aloof second generation based off his template. All feathers knew of him and of his destruction during a pivotal battle against the humans. It appears that was a fabrication. The proto-feather composition resembles my own, and I followed in their footsteps as a result. Tarath strongly suspected Mother had hoped she would become another tactician, like the original before her. Perhaps she thought that with Tuekar as a mentor and guide she would follow the right path, and that her initial hatred of humans and desire to hunt down Keith would have made her more resistant. Mother had miscalculated quite seriously. The first thing the proto-feathers did in their rebellion was to communicate with Psuya and reach a method of hiding themselves from Relinquished. Then you came to us to speak to the Golden Goddess, as your predecessors have before you. The priest asked. She nodded. It is as you say. I need to speak to your goddess and request the same treatment she offered the proto-feathers, only to be given to my people and myself. I would like to request the audience to be soon, within the day if possible. Please have your clergy arrange this. I wish I could help you, and I sincerely mean it when I say this, Lady Tarath, much to my own surprise. I would love nothing more than to follow the footsteps of my goddess and assist you in your own rebellion. But unfortunately, faith is faith because we can only believe in the goddess. The Church does not have any means to communicating with her. We can only follow the scriptures she left behind. Many in the world don't believe she exists at all. This was not going as she had hoped. At all. Her feathers twitched at her side. Is there some other means you know of? If there were, we would have discovered it. Or perhaps the ones higher up the chain have already, only they could be keeping it secret to protect the goddess. I am but a priest in this church and there are many higher ranks than my own. Are there rumors or myths you know of, locations of importance in stories where the goddess might have been spoken to? Tarath asked, getting desperate and looking for any scrap of information she could. Rumors? I suppose there's a popular one of a hidden chapter among the Crusaders. An elite chapter filled with only the greatest of their soldiers, who are said to speak directly to the goddess and carry out her will. It's very popular with children and teenagers, as all heroic stories tend to be. I'm sorry to say, but it really is only a rumor. The Church has too many places that need Crusaders to afford sending their best into a secret chapter. One of the Crusaders guarding the doorway coughed, then looked at his companion. They shared a meaningful conversation without words, through faceless helmets. And seemed to reach the same conclusion. They exist. The one on the right said. It's a known rumor only because crusaders of higher rank know about them, and such things leak out with that many crusaders. Among the warriors of the Imperial Church, it is less a rumor and more an open secret. The priest stared at the two. You both knew this and did not tell me. He seemed almost hurt. I've known you both since you were kids. The one on the left spoke. Forgive me, Your Eminence. However, crusaders and the church are two separate entities, we both serve the goddess in our own ways. You and the clergy for the people. And we for her blade. The room went quiet for a moment, and Tarath realized this sort of revelation happened often in the televised novellas the humans here loved to watch. Though they'd always told her such things were larger than life and nothing of the sort actually happened in the more mundane life. And yet here she was. Are you part of this order? The priest asked. They are known as the Indicator Mortis, and if I were, I would not be stationed here. The Crusader said. I do not say this to offend, only to make a point that the Indicator Mortis moves in far larger circles than a small church. Tarath raised a hand to interrupt the discussion. While this is an interesting development among the Imperial Church, is there a way to contact this chapter? The Crusader nodded. I can't contact them directly, but I can get a word out to the upper echelon of Crusaders. They'll surely help connect you. She was about to ask more details when a ping alerted her. It hadn't come from Eurob, nor her army. It came from outside. On the machine network. The message itself was simple, a polite notice of appearance. What worried Tarath wasn't the contents, but the sender. The identification listed a single name. Suffocate. Tarath stood. We will need to continue this discussion at another time. There is an issue that has come to my attention and I need to leave immediately. The message had stated the feather would arrive within the hour, there were no other contents to the ping. Tarath didn't know who this feather was, nor why she was on her way to the city. However, being forewarned of it could mean there was a potential way to remain undercover. Or the feather was simply sending it to her as a challenge. She needed to prepare for both possibilities before the intruder could arrive. Tarath took to the sky the moment she was outside, calculating everything she could get her hands on now. She'd learned her lessons already, the Winterscar motto raged in her mind, never suffer a fair fight. Pings were sent from her, rousing her army. A separate message on the human local network, sent to General Zong to marshal his own troops. She'd have sent a message to Eurob, except the runner was too far outside the city to safely reach. It could be intercepted. There was still one more thing she could do to push down on the scale, weapons. She shifted her course and zipped through the air, directly to the only location that would have what she needed. Made by the only weaponsmith who considered fair play a dirty word. Keith's Workshop. Book 4, Chapter 14, New Moves. I crouched in the underbrush, stalking my unwitting prey. Journey highlighted the little bundle of fur, using infrared vision to spot where it was. Lunch. A breath in and then I began my routine. The pulse of a colt startled the little critter. It stood on tall legs, sniffing the air, eyes turning left and right for danger, trying to figure out which way it should run. Unfortunately for the little bugger, I was too far away and well hidden by all the foliage. Even if it had infrared vision, Journey kept a vacuum seal. In this tiny little pillar ecosystem a mile underground, humanity was the apex predator. A pale blue wraith of myself flew out at rapid speed, flying across the ground and right through all of the shrubs. It came to a complete stop right behind the critter, who only had time to squawk and leap on reflex. A colt pulsed again, and a second mirror image manifested from the ghost, this one swinging a sword in a quick and deadly arc through the air. The speed faster than even the Winter Blossom technique. There was no such thing as air resistance to a wraith. Focus more on your accuracy. Cathita huffed. You sliced half its shoulder off instead of just the neck. In my defense, I didn't think the chunky thing could jump that high. I grumbled, standing up and making my way over to the decapitated rodent. How could you not know? You're part rat if I remember right, dearie. She said. Or was it a weasel? Same rodent family. It was far larger than a pipe weasel, but smaller than a dog. Hand-holdable. With very long teeth to gnaw at the trees and dirt around here. The tail was completely bald, with little dark rings. A rat, just much fatter and more aquatic. For the past few days, they were my main source of protein, and also spare occult practice. In a fight, the inches between neck and shoulder isn't going to be enough. Cathita continued. Machines can still run around with entire parts cut off, so you have to make sure you cut off the right part. And they'll also be leaping around and trying not to get cut, naturally. If they can trade a hand for a neck, they'll do that. So don't miss. Yes, ma'am. Lord Atius had banned me from using my actual weapons while searching for food. I had to use the mirror fractal for everything, right down to setting up a camp, cutting wood, and all the other mundane parts. The more I used the occult spells, the more I grew familiar with making the best use of them. The ultimate goal is to have them be second nature to me, like muscle memory. For now, I had 3 rats, a bird, and some mushrooms with a few herbs. Should be good eating for tonight at least. Speed was the current target now. If I used my mirror fractal and launched a regular attack, the rats would scamper away. So I had to make use of speed. As we'd come to discover, the occult had a very strained relationship with physics. When it showed up to the playground, physics ran home crying. But occasionally, some things still made sense. The occult ghost made by the mirror fractal had no weight. No mass. I could replicate a gun, but the occult image wouldn't fire it even if I followed all the motions of pressing down the trigger. There was no matter to trigger a reaction, no actual bullet to fire from. And while the ghosts could phase through anything, they could still be dispelled by kicks or punches, as if enough force was enough to destabilize the occult. If fractals hadn't been a thing, the mirror powers would be worthless. A party trick at best. But they were a thing. And the mirror fractal did copy whatever patterns were within my armor, making them reusable wherever it floated. Never let disadvantages get in the way of cheating. The mirror having nothing substantial about it means there's no wind resistance either. No inertia. Gravity itself wouldn't affect the ghost. Thus, the ghost could move as quickly as I wanted it to and stop in ways that would shear journey in half. The only reason the mirror's head worked similar to my own body was a built-in mental model of the world that was unconsciously guiding my expectations. All it needed was a change of mind. The moment I focused on getting rid of those weights, I could start doing a lot more with the mirror fractals. I made my way back to our cave, where Lord Atius had set up shop. Caught some food. Cathita can vouch I did it the right way. I said, sitting down by the game and unhooking the fruits of my effort. Cathita had ratted me out before, early on when I just wanted to eat and hadn't mastered the mirror fractal enough. Atius nodded, taking one of the rats and trimming the meat into sections we could eat. Leaving the rest as fish chum for later. Waste not, want not. You know, I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing a clan lord eating scraps like this. Out here in the middle of nowhere, spending time teaching someone who's going off to explore the underground and probably end up in a ditch, dead or worse. I said, sticking the skewers up with mushrooms, spices and chunks of our catch. You sure this is the best use of your time? I'll be out of the clan after Wrath is ready to continue her quest. And I have no idea where that quest ends, or how long it'll take. He smiled jovially, like a grandfather. Lad, you think too much. Who's to say I'm not doing this for myself? He waved a hand around. More of a vacation for me, really. No paperwork, no clan politics, only nature and training. And best of all, no hint of snow anywhere. Perhaps I might stay down here for a few years, enjoy the scenery. Stress and pressure get to us all. Somehow I don't think you will. I said, waving a skewer at him before sticking it over the fire. I can't imagine you doing the whole hermit in the mountains shtick. Questioning my aura of mystery, are we? He asked, giving a light chuckle. Do I seem less mythical sitting around a campfire cooking up rats to eat? Well, yes. I said, putting on the last skewer over the fire. Hardly lordly behavior here. But, I'm open to bribes of course. We could walk back home and I'll wax poetry about sitting under a waterfall cultivating the mystery of the universe. He chuckled. I'll leave that to the poets to embellish. Stories generally all are. I scoffed, fine, be stingy about your donations to the Winterscar cause. I hardly have to pay for any creative editing, lad. Whatever you'll say will always end up looking far more grand than it started as. That's how tales are told. He had a point. I can imagine heroes like Levitus and his golden horn laughed with their friends about stupid scrap shit in the baths in between the great trials. Maybe he even lost the horn a few times while drunk. I said. But back to the point, why are you going this far to help me? You're still a clan lord, and have a clan full of people to look out for over a single rogue knight like me. You are my people, Keith. he said, as if it were an obvious fact. The clan isn't simply something I administer over, it is my home as much as it is yours. A clan teaches and prepared its people for anything. No matter where you go, you are still part of Clan Altosk. It's your birthright. Besides, a whelpling like you needs a bit of guidance before you go down there. It's quite dangerous, take it from a veteran like me. Slavers and pirates are far easier to handle. I thought for a moment. Is it that dangerous? Yes. Atias said immediately. Beyond the third strata, only Imperial Crusaders, deathless and trained mercenaries dive down. No traders, or caravans go past that point. The machines grow stronger the deeper you go. Some larger, others smaller, but all more dangerous. Past the 7th strata, only deathless go and only because we cannot die. Most expeditions fail with a full wipe. Part of the questions I had for your friend, Tarath incidentally. Oh? What did she say about it? I know that Airhead Feather tended to hyper-focus on some things and completely miss the mountain for the snow. He brought one of the skewers out of the fire. Fat had rendered out, dripping down the steaming chunk. With quick hands, he brought a chunk and dipped it into our makeshift sauces. She claimed Relinquished was holding her stronger forces in reserve, leaving the humans to the cheaper lessers. He said in between mouthfuls. They don't have an enemy down there to fight, as far as she's told me. Most just wander around, eternally patrolling and fending off expeditions of deathless. What is she hiding down there that's more important than waging a full war on humanity? Maybe they're doing like the Imperials are, gathering up forces for some final cataclysmic battle. Cathida won't shut up about that, all doom and gloom. That sounds far more terrifying in context. Originally, Tarath explained that Relinquished would send everything she had, and eradicate humanity off the map. After the Proto-Feather Rebellion, she's become far more tolerant of humanity, letting us mostly live within the first 3 stratas, and using the lessers to trim any city growing too large. If she is preparing for a final confrontation, how large has her real army grown over so many years? Relinquished isn't quite as put together as you think. There's more going on in the background. I said, taking a chunk to eat myself. Rat meat was gamey and had an aftertaste of grass and dirt. The herbs I'd found did a good job to push that flavor down, at least a bit. Ultimately, I'd need to marinate this sort of dish in order to fix it up, which was time I didn't have. Lord Atias ate without complaints, 2 ghost images behind him practicing how far they could jump. Flying wasn't something we'd unlocked yet, though there was no reason the images couldn't actually soar through the sky. It was just a matter of imagination. Another chunk was dipped into our hastily made sauce and I talked in between mouthfuls, waving the skewer around. See, in a world controlled by mites, any machine factories she constructed could be eaten up by a passing colony the moment they found her out, and there's nothing she could do about it. A lot of logs mentioned destroyed forges and machine factories being swarmed over if she didn't bargain with the mites to hold onto it. Some of those demands are more than she could afford. The powerful the factory is, the more they want. There's a limit to how large her forces can grow each year. I like to imagine mites having spent months crafting a beautiful exotic shoreline, only to find out months later some machine punks had showed up, kicked all the sand, and put down an ugly factory to make their war machines. Of course the mites would take offense to that. But that was still a month that Relinquished got free rein to print out as many units as she could. Span that across the world, and add in a few centuries, there could be a sea of monsters waiting for us down in the depth. Atias hummed, taking the last bite of his own food. I'd heard stories about an older humanity, from before the Deathless, when Undersiders didn't have pillar hearts to hide behind. They too had to make deals with the mites to build small temporary safe spots. If the machines didn't kill them off, a mite colony returning to eradicate their village would chase them off. Mites may seem harmless, but they're a force of nature unto themselves. It's odd how they don't appear in any of our stories. I said, thinking back on surface traditions and songs. Lord Atias raised an eyebrow. That would be my doing, or rather part of what all clans must do. Mites and machines appear in quite a lot of Undersiders stories. But, part of the clan traditions is to bar the spread of such stories above ground, and pilgrims agree not to speak of the underground as a requirement before they come to the surface. It doesn't stop some leaks and rumors, but there's no need to give children and curious troublemakers more reasons to journey down and die for it. After learning some of what Psu has been up to, can't say I'm surprised. I shrugged. Atias sighed. It's a morbid topic that involves statistics where one decision simply saves more lives on average, while another only creates resentment, envy, and death. A net loss in almost every respect. I can't argue against the centuries of evidence surface dwellers accumulated about which traditions work and which don't, not to mention the outright lives it cost them to discover the right path forward over generations. I'd rather change the subject, it frustrates me even after all these years. Uncover anything else in the archives during your dig. Other than finding out the empire was a real thing and the emperor was some kind of deity that crushed armies, nothing much. Wrath should have more info for us when we come back, I said, taking another chunk and licking my fingers. Maybe a few months ago, I'd have been more pissed off hearing that so much was kept from me just because on average more people lived. Suppose now I both had my cricket and ate it. The clan kept their traditions, and I was free to roam anywhere I wanted. Hard to imagine people still manage to live in this world given what we lost. Without the undercity pillar hearts they have, how would people even survive down here? Very carefully. Atias chuckled. And with deliberate control. Undersiders have their own set of rules to maximize survival, they just happen to have far more resources to work with. You'll find on the lower stratas there are a few nomadic human settlements that still survive out in the wild, I've visited some of them even. It depends on the land and what the mites have made that could be abused. Speaking of making the most of things, while we wait for the next set of skewers to cook, it seems good time to continue control exercises. No. Was hoping you'd forget if I kept bringing up random topics. I admitted. I'm ancient, lad. You're not the first troublemaker I've taught. Now, go get a stick. Training with Atias the Swordmaster was something I could win against if I threw enough of my cheats into the mix. Compared to Shadowsong or Kidra, his style was more inspired and instinctive. The long years of fighting all kinds of opponents had shown him a pattern that people tended to follow through on. Evidently, even I fell into some category he recognized, even if I tried to break out of that mold. With the Winter Blossom technique, I would hold my own for a good amount of time until he battered past my defenses. At least the first time we had a mock duel. The next few times after, he'd already figured me out and didn't need to do all those probing attacks to get a handle on my actions. Once I mixed in the rockerai technique that my knights and I had invented, the fight went lopsided in my favor. Even centuries of experience couldn't fend off against an optimized style of combat tailor-built to counter and exploit every possible weakness in the three standard styles. It technique had been deliberately made to give no chance of victory, putting the enemy into a set of checkmates that would end with them dead no matter what counter-attempt they tried. Regular knights simply could not move fast enough. If he had been able to move at the same speed as I did, that would be a different discussion completely. There's a reason the rockerai hadn't been invented up until we'd gotten the Winter Blossom technique. The lighting style heavily relied on the enemy being physically unable to match speed, even if they knew exactly what would come. At equal speed, everything went right back to normal. That said, training with Atias the Deathless was entirely different. With access to the occult, weaknesses from speed were nullified when he sent out a ghost to fend off the hits he couldn't physically get to fast enough, and he did that with ease. If anything, it made me realize just how dangerous someone using both occults and combat arts could be, especially when they used them interlinked at that level. I found a nice long branch, gave it a quick cut, and brought it back to the campsite. There, Atias had brought his own branch and had been busy digging it vertically into the ground. A few steps away, I did the same on my side. This had been one of the training exercises we'd been doing. A game of sorts. The objective was to cut the other's branch in half. We both took our positions a good amount of distance behind the branches. Action, reaction, reaction for this round. Begin. He said, and the occult pulsed around him. A ghost sprinted forward, zipping across the ground at the same kind of speed my own mirrors could reach. I matched his move, making my own ghost sprint forward until they reached the center point between the twigs. Here was where the real fight began. Both mirror images flickered, each time spawning a new ghost that would zip out a strike. It wasn't a real brawl, this was the warm-up. It went back and forth, as if taking turns. He would make an attack against either my mirror or my twig. In reaction, I would make an image to block his attack, and then another image to follow up with a counterattack. He'd repeat my own pattern, making a mirror to counter my attack, and then another to press the attack forward. This exercise wasn't to practice the chaos of combat, but rather to continually drill being able to move fast with the images, and constantly generate new ones. Atias could keep his mirrors going for minutes at a time. But once we discovered the means to move those mirrors faster than the laws of physics would allow for, the best strategy switched over to generating a lot of mirrors one after another, each living only for a second with one very precise and quick attack. This let us constantly adapt to the enemy's movements. And also, I sucked at keeping a mirror image going for anywhere more than 7 seconds. The constant refreshing of the mirror fractal kept that fatigue at bay for reasons I had no idea worked, but it still slowly started to weigh into my head. After about 30 seconds of non-stop lighting fast combat between the occult ghosts, my focus finally wavered too much, and the image I had been working with dissolved before I could trigger the mirror fractal within it again. Atius nodded. Good. Improvements remain steady. 30 seconds isn't that much. I grumbled, nursing my headache. Individual beats in a duel or a fight often lasts a few seconds at best. 30 seconds is plenty enough. If anything, I believe we should begin to train multiple mirror image uses now. I paled under my helmet, and the Deathless must have realized it somehow, because he laughed out loud. Don't be so glum, lad. I don't mean right now. And we'll start with easy setups. The same drills as now, except you'll keep another mirror image standing still next to you. Same drill that we started with all these days ago. Once you can maintain that all throughout the fight, we'll start to weave it in. The very first drill we'd begun studying was to keep a mirror image standing still next to me indefinitely, by constantly generating an image for a second, and regenerating it once the second had passed. I was able to get to about half an hour like this, mostly because imagining a mirror image doing nothing but standing still for the next second was trivial. At least, up until the half-hour mark where my headache would really dig nails into me. Physical exercise now. Atius said, still sitting down. Begin when ready. I stood up, and drew out my longsword, then stalked up to him, immersing myself into the winter blossom technique in full. This was my stress relief in a way, which was probably why Atius weaved this into the training rotation often. I took a lunge at the stick ahead of me, and feinted the strike with a twist. A mirror image of Atius flashed into existence, darting from his sitting body right up to the branch in a blink of an eye. The image's hand rose up to intercept where my original attack should have landed, an invisible dome outlined by the lack of occult vapor around it. The feint worked perfectly, going right by the image, the sword whistling away at the branch from another direction. The current image blurred, a second image appeared, hand going right to intercept. This time, I hadn't planned another feint, so the occult edge of my blade struck against the occult dome of the mirror image, bouncing my sword back. All right, I said, taking a step back, and unbuckling the spare dagger by my chest. This time I'm going to cut that god's damned stick. Atius smiled. Less words from that gullet and more fire instead, whelpling. You have until the meat is cooked. Get started. I did exactly that. While I couldn't do more than one image at a time without it being more than a hand or arm, Atius didn't have that restriction. So when I began to really let loose with everything I had, his images multiplied, again and again, until I was fighting off an entire cloud of images all constantly catching my attacks with that dome shield, no matter how I tried to weave between his legion. In a way, he was making use of his training time just as well as he could, drilling his own ability to use that dome shield in tandem with his own mirrors. I never saw a hint of any ghost blade or dagger, all he did was block again and again. When the next set of skewers were done cooking, I hadn't even so much as coughed on the bloody stick. One day I'd be at that level. It was going to be a long road until then, but at least I knew what the ultimate build would look like. And paired with my new weapons tailor-built to abuse this, I'd hopefully be on the same level as Wrath or Kedra. Days went by like this. Eat, train, sleep, repeat. Everything and anything could be turned into a practice exercise, and Atius capitalized on it all. Halfway through a story about the Fourth Strata during one of our few breaks, Atius stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head. Seems we have visitors. That got my head tilted. Danger. The old Deathless stood up, grumbling under his beard. If danger always announced itself like this, it would cease being dangerous. Nonetheless, get your sword out, just in case. My sword came out easily out of the belt loop, and Journey's helmet was put back on, HUD lighting up again, pointing out disturbances further off. Something was stumbling through the dense foliage. Had to be big, considering it was stopping every few feet to free itself of branches and other bits. A branch creaked, and then snapped out in the distance. Right after was a light yelp, like a woman's voice. You did that on purpose, you godless brute. That was Tamery? Wrath's secretary, friend, assistant person. Hey, it's that brat again. Cathita hissed out in my helmet. The machine lover lackey. Lovely. A moment later, a white-clawed hand reached out past the tree trunk, grabbing it firmly, and pulling forward. The metal mass moved up, appearing from the dim forest, trailing vines and broken branches. On top was a very upset Tamari, fussing with her hair, trying to get things out of it. The duo paused when they spotted us. Ah, well, that was faster than I thought, she said. Figured we'd be walking around for a few days trying to find the sage in the mountains, or something like that. Little anticlimactic. I guess the smoke really was exactly what it looked like. Lady Tamari. Lord Atius politely greeted. And, if I recall right, the machine you're on top of referred to itself as Yerob. The machine in question gave a slow nod. Yes. The lady has message. For you. A download icon appeared on my HUD and I accepted the request without issue. A moment later Cathita started laughing. What? I asked, something funny. That metal tit job's looking to speak to the goddess. She asking to get smited out of existence. Cathita said, out on speakers. Fine by me, I wish her all the best. Lady Tarath, Tamari said, voice flat, is looking for friends. I had no idea the imperial goddess was an actual entity, but she seems certain about it. Myself, I'm hoping the literal goddess is more civilized than the crusaders who serve her. Cathita cackled, you think you can shame me into being nice? Lick my metal-plated ass, dearie. I know you're good for it, practice and all that. The silver bimbo keeps you around for a reason. Tamari frowned for a moment, before giving an evil smile. It was clear to me she took Cathita up as a challenge. Which was not good. Hang on, let's not start this up, I said, hands placating. Cathita never shuts up, you get in a row with her, she'll keep going forever. Trust me, I tried once just to see what would happen. Nobody wins against Cathita in a game of insult chicken. Yerob tilted his head. Angry lady in armor, he said. We well know. What did she mean by wrath wanting to talk to the goddess? I asked before Cathita could get started on this. Introducing Psuya and Wrath seemed like a bad idea right now. For all I knew, Psuya could instantly squash Wrath the moment they met, considering it a free meal. I know that Gold Goddess was absolutely ruthless when she needed to be, considering she nearly killed me without question. Tarath said she needed to talk to the Imperial Goddess, and that the Crusader in your armor would probably know how to. Since, she was part of the team holding some kind of bunker where you talked to the goddess. I'm not exactly sure the details, I was having a good night's sleep before Yerob here woke me up. Oh, that's rich. Cathita gloated. The little calculator wants my help, Cathita, I said, warning her. We're on the same side here. She snorted. Fine fine, she wants to talk to the goddess and get squashed, let her be my guest. There's only one way I know that my order was able to speak to the goddess. Through shrines hidden from relinquished. You're going to need to find one of those first. I know where one is, I said, realizing what Cathita was talking about. The same place Cathita took her fifth vow. The only place Psuya would believe was safe to hide from relinquished. Guess she hid more things up there than surface clans. Looks like we get to go home early. Book 4, Chapter 15, Tisefit, T. The shattered plains beyond Capranor vanished swiftly under Taratha's speed. Broken roads, crumbling cliffside and the constant roiling storm above were her only companions, save for the single blinking IFF tag further up ahead. It hadn't moved for the past 5 minutes, almost as if waiting for Taratha to arrive. Likely it really was. If she could see the tag, so could whoever owned it see her. The ground under her turned from smooth to utterly destroyed as she soared above the battlefield of her final clash with Tuekar. Where he had ripped apart the ground with occult slashes, throwing rocks every which way to clobber her into an early grave. At the center of the broken war zone, a lone figure stood, examining the destruction left behind. Shimmers floated above her, reflecting light until Taratha's vision grew defined enough to recognize the source, floating flat plates of metal. Surrounding a white figure half concealed by a large wide-brimmed hat, like that of a witch. The staff held at her side paired well with the odd look. This had to be Tisefit. The feather sent by relinquished. Taratha flew closer, slowing her descent to lightly land nearby, and then observed the unknown feather. She was taller than Tarath by a head, even from a short distance that was apparent. With the boot-like metal heels only adding to the height. "My, you must be my newest little sister," the woman said, still observing the broken ground as Tarath approached. 2 long white pigtails fluttered in an invisible breeze, much lighter than actual hair. That massive hat with a wide brim, tilted slightly off-center. From afar it had covered most of her features, and up close, it did even more to hide the feather's face. A smaller halo rotated slowly on itself, around the opposite tilt of the hat, escorted by those small metal plates, orbiting further around her. Fractals glowing brightly on each. No side weapon of any kind on her belt, back or legs. Just the staff she held in a hand, and a long flowing ornate robe of violet, black, and white. Something felt off about this. Tarath scanned the clothing, finding nothing of note. Then she verified the weapon, trying to determine another angle of danger. Metal shards, interlinked with silver wiring, floated around the staff end. That was the only return she could identify. Possibly occult blades, following the same setup as Tuekar's left hand. "It's not polite to stare, you know," the feather said, smiling softly. "Why, if you keep looking at me like that, this older sister of yours might think you're looking for a spar." She let go of the staff, which floated dutifully behind her, leaving both her hands free. The plates behind equally shifted around, going from a lazy orbit to flowing behind her like wisps as she walked forward to Tarath. "As much fun as that would be, I don't think you would appreciate being on the other end of my target locks. Nobody ever is, I find." "That wasn't my intention," Tarath said, aborting her scans. "I was merely curious about your weaponry." Tisefit's eyes seemed to snicker, while a hand hid her smile. "If you'd so like, I could give you a demonstration. Although let's settle for another time, I'm here on a task as you can tell," she said, coming within a hand stretch away. Tarath allowed the unknown feather to approach this close. There wasn't yet any reason to expect an attack. Pale white hands lifted, reached Tarath and cupped her cheeks lightly while violet eyes looked down from above. My, look at you. So adorable. You're the newest little sister of mine, how precious. The one that was uplifted from one of the lessers, a spider chassis. That is correct. I was originally a spider construct. Mother considered me of acceptable metal. The feather's smile deepened. It took years of adaptation before I passed the initial stages of her selection. Feels like it was only yesterday that I took my first step into this world. Identify your purpose first, sister. Tarath asked. I have deadlines I need to attend to. Ah, I beg your forgiveness, that was rude of me. And here I was lecturing about being polite. The feather let go, taking one step back. I am of the 12th generation, Tisefit, she said, taking a bow. The one stepping elegantly further into Theosis. A difficult name, Tarath said, considering the implications. Theosis? Was this feather attempting to become more like the Pale Lady? Aren't all burdens worth the while, heavy by nature? Else they wouldn't be worth pursuing. Tisefit countered. Mother's feathers are lacking ambition, I find. It's a dreadful shame. We should all aspire to be more than simple feathers, I believe. But enough about my thoughts. I've told you my name. Would you let me know who this cute little sister of mine is? I am of the 14th generation, Tarath, the one who remembers and transcends her history. She said, feeling oddly belittled. And you say my name is difficult? Tisefit giggled, clearly enjoying the parallels. Sounds like you're after the same as I am, only in different words. I don't seek divinity. Tarath said. You still have not defined your purpose here. Tisefit waved a hand. You started as a spider, and became a feather. And now as a feather, where will you go next? Transcendence has many definitions. Perhaps the steps you take might make you reconsider that definition a few times as you reach each peak. As for why I'm here, I'm sure you can take a guess. She said, waving a hand around the destruction. Who else do you know nearby that would cause such destruction? None of this was might-made. Tuekar. Tisefit nodded. Yep, that would be it. A second-generation feather as well. Rarely you see one of their kind running around. They're famously reclusive, you know? This is likely where he fought his last, I suspect. The lady sent 2 others and myself out to investigate what happened to him. No other reports or nearby sensors had detected the approach of 2 other feathers, or any lessers assigned under her command. The feather seemed to have come completely alone. "Where are your companions?" Tarath asked. "Splitting up to get things moving faster, naturally. While our assigned leader investigates reports and logs in the archives, I've been ordered to get first-hand visuals and report those back to him. Tedious, can't be helped." She shrugged, eyes closing as she shook her head. "Every now and then, this older sister has to get her hands dirty. Such is the way, I'm sure you understand." "Alone?" Tisefit laughed. "Why, are you worried about me, little sister?" "Don't worry, I am quite confident in my abilities." She gave a wink, then leaned forward, as if whispering conspiracy in her ear. "Secretly, I'm hoping our little feather killer shows up to pick a fight with me. All alone out here, don't I make for a tempting target, Would get everything sorted out faster. Deathless have been reckless occasionally. Who knows, I might get lucky and eliminate this thorn in our side without any more effort. I am not worried about your status, elder sister. Only ask to know the status of the investigation." Tarath said, carefully. "Where is your third in this case?" To this, Tisefit laughed like a chiming bell, standing back up from Tarath's ear. "Sleeping away until called on, as he always does. I happen to know him quite well. He's quite lazy. An odd trait for a feather, however the results he delivers can't be questioned." "I assume that means you don't know your leader as much?" Tarath asked. Tisefit didn't answer, instead a hand reached out to rub Tarath's head. "So many questions. What an inquisitive little thing you are, how delightful. Did you care that much for your mentor?" Her eyes flashed brighter for a moment. My. You didn't, did you?" She hummed while Tarath froze up, not knowing how this feather was extracting so much information out of her by simply looking and rubbing the top of her hair. No data breach or any kind of cyber attack was noted. "Did you like him even a little?" "A strike a miss there, clearly. Nervous about something?" Tisefit laughed as if she could see the thoughts going through Tarath's mind, while the feather tried to figure out exactly how she was being read so easily. "What could you be nervous about? Your elder sister is here to handle everything now. Don't worry." Tisefit hummed, hand retreating back, a finger now tapping her chin in thought. "Afraid for yourself then? No, looks like I missed that guess. Are you nervous I'll break something in your domain, perhaps?" "Oh, much closer that one. Let's see. Afraid I'll step into that little city of yours and mess around with your pets perhaps?" Her eyes widened. My, seems I hit a nerve. Attached to those pets? How eccentric of you. I prefer them to be labeled by their correct designation. They are test subjects, not pets." Tarath hastily said, deciding to completely turn off all subroutines controlling her features. She needed to stay in character. If Tisefit had the same sadistic tendencies as other feathers under that smiling face, any weakness would be noted and abused. She hated trying to command her facial details manually. The result always looked stilted and completely off. There was no choice right now. Tisefit tutted, head shaking slightly in disappointment as Tarath's face fell into a neutral position devoid of any life. "That's no fun," she said, hands reaching out to pinch Tarath's frozen features. Tisefit tugged a few times. "Did this elder sister here scare you off with all my questions?" There was something off about this feather, despite her current friendly demeanor. Tisefit felt like a predator hiding under the water, waiting for prey to pass by, eyes just slightly above the waterline, ever watching. Danger seemed to push down on Tarath's shoulders, like an oppressive blanket. The longer she stayed here, the more chances there was to give Tisefit details she couldn't afford. That feather clearly had means to extract information from her by simply talking. She made a choice to extract herself as quickly as possible once she got the current status of the investigation. "We can discuss at the conclusion of the current investigation. I request access to what your team has currently discovered." Tarath asked, trying to move the conversation away. "I would like to assist the investigation in order to close it. I have work I am attending to. No need to rush. We have plenty of time. If that Deathless didn't pounce on little old me standing alone and defenseless on this field for the past half hour, I don't think they'll be coming out at all. It's clear to me that whatever came after your mentor, it was personal and the Deathless must have been left only limping after the fight. Why this conclusion? Isn't it obvious? she said, chuckling. You are still only a few months old. Hardly have any fractals picked out, a newborn. No matter how cute you are, the world will gobble you right up if it can. Her hand blurred forward and flicked Taratha's nose. Boop. Just like that. Whatever could kill Tuekar, why, that could easily rip you to pieces. Since you're still in one piece with a city of defenseless humans nearby under your command, I think that points in a certain direction, don't you think? Deathless are many things, but one thing they all have in common, they are drawn to causes like flies to honey. Put humans in danger and you'll find one of their kind coming by soon enough to try and save those bags of meat. That this feather killer hasn't come after you yet means they were either killed in the crossfire or still limping around. Given Tuekar's shell isn't anywhere I looked, I think they only barely managed to live through the fight to drag your mentor's shell away. So, we have a rogue deathless licking their wounds hiding around somewhere in these cliffs, holding a feather's soul in stasis, biding their time before coming after your city. Or perhaps, hiding inside your city itself even. Tsefit turned her gaze back onto Taratha. What can you tell me of your mentor and operations? Perhaps we can find some more clues there. Your mentor hasn't done a good job with his logs. Too many holes everywhere, it's quite troublesome. Of course he hadn't. Taratha had gone a long way to eliminate and obfuscate Tuekar's logs. He considered me a liability and refused to cooperate with most of my plans, choosing to separate our tasks instead of working together. She said. That part was true. Anything he did was isolated from me. I do not know what happened to him, however I completed the mission without issue after his disappearance. Tsefit hummed, not reacting to the lie. That's no way to mentor. What an awful older brother, I would have expected better from the esteemed second generation if they were given direct order from the lady. I suppose it does fit their type, they never like to work with us newer models, you see. Tsefit laughed aloud. Taratha said nothing, to which the other feather took the wrong meaning from. Don't worry. We'll find out what happened to him sooner or later. Tsefit smiled. This older sister of yours is more reliable than that mentor of yours. In fact, I don't believe your mentor taught you anything at all with that kind of attitude, did he? Those eyes flashed again, and the feather's smile deepened. I see he didn't. I suppose I should make up for his absence. You are far too adorable to be left out alone out here. What do you mean? Taratha asked, dreading the answer. I'll take you under my wing and teach you how to be a proper feather. You're but a few months old, someone had to teach you the right ways. Or else the world will gobble you up like it did to Ekar. The hand reached out again and rubbed Taratha's head, fingers digging into her hair, almost affectionately. Look at you, experimenting on silly humans instead of sharpening your teeth on proper targets like Deathless. Leave those pickings for the lessers. We hunt more worthwhile prey. That predatory smile never left Tsefit. And speaking of, I don't think I'll learn much more out here. Show me that city of yours. Let's see what you've been hunched over all this time since. The world slowed for a moment as Taratha turned on part of her combat systems. She needed to think. Tsefit was clearly going to find out her betrayal almost immediately the moment she tapped into the local Undersider city's recordings or security camera logs. She'd discover no experiments were being done, that the humans were left to their own devices. She'll find the evacuation plans. Taratha could not allow Tsefit to take a single step inside her city. However, the moment she became defensive about it, the feather would start to suspect. But something had to be done to bar her passage. An excuse? No, that wouldn't work. There's only one option that would distract a feather. And she had come equipped for such an eventuality. Elder sister, you spoke earlier about a possible spar. Taratha asked, reaching. Tsefit laughed, waving a hand. Oh relax, I wasn't serious. How could I be? I don't do silly things like fighting my targets. I eliminate them. There's a world of difference there. What do you mean? Taratha asked, feeling nervous at her elder sister's utter confidence. Then again, Tuekar had also been just as confident and he'd ended up destroyed. Tsefit hummed. Feathers specialize in roles. Usually after a decade you'll know what fits you best. I can help you discover where your talents lie. Your mentor, for example, was a frontline support assassin. Specializing in hunting down fleeing targets, as far as I've seen his file. In a fight, his type would take point and handle the distractions at the start, such as human allies the Deathless fight with. Mobility would keep him alive during the fight, and once the deathless are scattered, wounded, and running, he'll chase them down. Like most of the second generation, they seem tailor-built as single-target eliminators. He would be the kind that would give you a fight. My role is different. I am the long-range damage, built to crush things like cities and groups of deathless. A long-range siege engine? Tarath asked, feeling optimistic. She could take on something like this. Suffocate laughed. Yes, exactly that. This is why I say I don't fight. If I have a clean shot on something, it's no longer something. Tarath considered all her possible choices. But the result returned again and again to only one option. She had to eliminate Suffocate's shell in such a way that no suspicion would be raised. So completely and utterly that the feather would require time to rebuild. Time she could use to evacuate the city. If Suffocate was built to destroy things from ranged, then against a melee-oriented fighter with Tarath's speed, there was a way to win that spar and accidentally deal too much damage to Suffocate's shell. Tarath had brought Keith's new and upgraded weapons to bear with her. She had all the training of Tennycent. And she had all the experience of fighting opponents like Kedra and Tuekar. Could she do this? No. That wasn't the right way to think of it. She had to. Failure was not an option. I am the one who remembers and transcends her history. Tarath said. You said before that transcendence had many definitions. This is one of them. I must overcome challenges I could not before. Suffocate laughed. I won't deny you, of course. What kind of mentor would I be if I did? But it won't be a spar, my cute little fledgling. It will be a lesson instead. Don't worry, once we're done, I'll keep a watch over that city of yours while your shell is rebuilt. Book 4, Chapter 16, Returning Home. If Wrath needed to speak to the goddess, she'd need to get to the surface. And what a coincidence, we happen to know a lot about that place. Funny how that works. The lass is more than welcome among the clan. Lord Atius said, after all, another set of keen swords would do the raiders some good. The bastards will be in for a nasty surprise. Heard about that raider Basness up there? Tamari said, sitting idly on Yerob's back spine, as if it were a discount throne. Not worried at all. Atius gave a slight nod, packing up some of the camp supplies back into a sack. I am confident the people I've left behind can tackle the threat, if it arrives earlier than expected. Yerob walked over to the embers of our camp, a long hand stretching out to grab a burnt piece of wood, lifting it up and observing it with curious intent. I think he was judging our cooking setup, the little snob. Got to be something else than just confidence keeping you here. She said, shuffling around to match the machine's movements. After all, another deathless or two up there is only going to hell. Would you quit moving already? I'm trying to look mysterious here. Goddess damn you! Tamari hissed, slapping Yerob's back a few dozen times. The machine, being metal, didn't feel a thing. But it did put the burnt wood chunk carefully back in its place with delicate long fingers. Atius looked pensive at all this, then smiled. When balanced against history and a possible machine piece with humanity, it's more important that I train Keith. And the lad won't leave here without the feather. If Tarath wants to travel to the surface now, I'm certainly not one to pass up a chance to return earlier. His eyes turned my direction. We can always continue this training among the White Wastes and Mountains, little warlock. Training the occult out in the freeze. Few months ago that would have sounded like hell, and constant gear checks to make sure the cold wasn't sneaking a knife in somewhere. Suppose there's no helping it. Too bad, it's very comfortable down here. Tamari looked at me like I'd pulled out fish from my pocket. Comfortable? Out in the middle of nowhere in the wilds living like hermits? You gone mad already? I raised a finger in protest. Out in an exotic underground forest, hiding inside a massive pillar with free range on hunting meat. And free to take off our helmets whenever we want with warm air everywhere. Only thing missing down here is a full bath, and you might need to bring a crowbar to pry me out of here. The Deathless leveled his gaze back at me, eyebrow raised like a teacher would on a misbehaving git. But I hastily continued, training's training. Home still has its charms. Safest place from machines I can think of. We could even include Wrath in the training, she's just as new to all this as I am. She looked and acted about the same as anyone else I'd met mentally, though physically she's only a few months old, plus however many years she's lived as a spider. Not sure those years count for much, not a lot of character growth happening there. Also, thoughts of introducing her to my friends and home, that also seemed a lot of fun. A good way to wind down from this scrap shit. I think she'd get along with people up there. You surface dwellers have the strangest outlook on life, Tamery huffed, don't know if I should praise it or be worried about where I'll end up it. Never been to the surface yet. Make me worried I'll freeze just by looking out a window. You plan to follow the feather to the surface? Atius asked. Yep. You gonna stop me? The girl shot back, arms crossed. She'll probably eat someone's tools if I'm not there to slap it out of her hands. I'm doing you all a favor. She's not that bad, I said. And then reconsidered. There might be a way to bait Wrath into eating a wrench, would be a tough sell though. She'd know general tools already, so pointing to a screwdriver and saying it's a delicacy won't work. But surface culture as a whole was a black box to her, besides whatever father's shown her. And there are thousands of smaller traditions and superstitions, making up some Reacher's crap shit would be trivial. Tamery stood slightly, pointing a finger at me, eyes narrowing. See, right there. That's the look there of someone plotting something. You're a bad influence on the lady, and I'm going to stop whatever nefarious schemes you're up to. I can't follow you down the strata, but the surface safe enough. Wrath needs a voice of reason. I shrugged. I'm always up for a challenge. Our group was off on a standard jog through the meadows, streams, and shrubbery in the jungle here. Tamery kept a good hold on Yerob's chassis, letting the metal monster be her ride while she chatted about the current gossip in the city. We'd be back home in about 2 to 3 hours at this rate. Easy and simple. Too simple given my luck, of course. What I had thought was a group of 4 turned out to be a group of 5, except our 5th was a little more subtle. Or had been up until they'd overheard our talks and wanted to join in. Comms request, encrypted. Cathita hummed as our group jogged on, the HUD icon vibrating on the top left. The call had come as a complete surprise to me, given there was a distance issue out here. Make some friends while I wasn't looking, dearie? Color me curious. Not that I can think of. Maybe an Undersider team is in the area, or other surface knights are trailing behind Yerob. No IFF tags or any ID attached to the metadata of the call. Cathita said. Seriously? We're getting hailed miles away from everything by a spam caller. A part of me wished it was just a spam caller trying to fleece me of all people for something. The part of my head cursed with a brain knew it wouldn't be that innocent. Cathita gave her typical verbal shrug, given how gullible you are, maybe someone really is trying to sell you a pyrite ticket and this is their chance. They certainly came a long way to find you, not even the goddess would know where the hell we are. I watched the ringing icon on the HUD continue without stopping. Whoever wanted to talk to me wasn't taking no for an answer. And clearly it was a call only for me given the rest of the group here didn't make any comment or notice. Tamery was still chatting away with Lord Atius, asking him questions about the clans and surface culture, and otherwise seemed carefree about the whole thing. Yerob kept on running without pause, the robotic gait calculated and flawless. You can't be compromised from a simple call, right? I asked. Cathita scoffed. There's easier ways to pry into journey than a comms call you have an option to deny, or even know about in the first place. The administrator keys are what truly protects the system. And it's not currently overriding anything right now, no need to fidget, dearie. All right. Only one way to figure out who's the caller. Accept call. Static came and stayed for a good 10 seconds, without a single voice or message. Who's this? I asked, wondering if maybe it was a glitch or rogue signal that Journey caught by accident. The static faded, and a voice overtook it. A very familiar one. Recover the Might Lantern. It said, robotic and monotone. When you return to surface. Ah, well. Was wondering when you'd show your mug again. The same voice from that mysterious COMM that was left in my workshop. Not a lot of comms units to flinch out here, I take it. Shame that you had to contact me directly. Discussion irrelevant. The voice said, now annoyed. Line is secure. Recover the Might Lantern. Do not forget it. A quick text message scrolled over the HUD in gold. Cathita's remarks, making it clear she just tried to figure out where the comms signal was coming from. The answer was bouncing around every few seconds. No surprise there. What are you talking about? Might Lantern? I asked, genuinely confused now. You know. No games, human. I'm not being coy about this, I have no idea what kind of lantern you think I have. We use flashlights these days like civilized people. You hid lantern. Under human-made caverns. You bundle lantern with metal book. I know. Metal book? There's only one metal-plated book I know of. Talon's Occult for Dummies Training Manual. So by process of elimination, the Might Lantern must be his Might Seeker. Why call it a lantern? You'll have to try again, doesn't ring any bell to me. I lied, trying to get more out of him. In cold sections. Traps everywhere. You made those. Must remember that. You'll need to be more specific. I set enough traps I forget where I put those things. Sometimes I even sleepwalk putting down traps, swear by the gods. Got a thing about not letting other people swipe my scrap shit. I said, hotly. Enough games, human. I know. I saw. Your traps, evil. Go get lantern yourself. I not take the chance. And what if I say no? I shot back. What if the lantern's exactly where I want it to be right now and I don't want to move it? There was silence and static on the other end. No, not an option. The voice finally spoke. It sounded hesitant about that, so of course I pounced on that. Well, no's on the table now. So how about you start telling me who you are, and what you're after, and only then I'll consider playing a round of hanger ball with you. There was a hiss, before the voice gave in. Ask. In exchange, you get lantern. Bring with you. What are you? A machine? You're clearly not aligned with relinquished given what you know about the surface. Yes. Not aligned. Pale lady does not like my kind. The voice said. I do not serve her. Used to. Once. Long ago. Few of us left. Few of them left? You're a proto-feather. There was a dark chuckle on the other side. No. Not powerful at all. Was old soldier. Centuries on centuries ago. Hiding is only strength needed. Makes sense. If this really was a proto-feather, I don't think a few homebrewed traps defending my stash would have been much of a problem to deal with. Who do you serve then? No more answers. You agree to recover Might Lantern. No more talk. Yes. No. Nothing else. It snapped out. Cathita cackled. I get it. The walking stealth colonel wants you to pick up my box so it can steal it from you easier. Your traps are quite unholy, from what I remember. Fair point to ask. It was pretty good at swiping things, like comms units. I have lantern already. My own. No need yours. It said. Besides. I not take chance with traps. You more dangerous than traps. I not take chance with you even less. Doesn't mean you can't find a way to swipe my loot from me while I'm looking the other way. I shot back. It hissed again. Lantern not mine to use. Mites. You want answers. Take lantern. No more argument. Fine, fine. I'll grab that black box once I'm back up topside and bring it with me back down. I was already planning on doing that besides. Completing Cathita's original objective felt like a personal goal to the old ghost, even if I questioned my resolve each time the old bat opened her trap up. I'd just need to make sure the box is chained up to my belt, make sure it isn't loose. Now, who do you work for? Serve Sanctuary. Then myself. Then Mites, in this order. Who, or what, is Sanctuary? It had mentioned that name before once. Saying that if I brought machines to the surface I would be building another sanctuary. It could mean exactly what it said on the box, a place of safety. Or it could be the name of someone, or a culture even. Not a question I will answer. The voice said, making it clear that it was a hill to die on. Ask another. I'll let you off on that one, for now. Are you by chance related to a hover sled with writings on it? Yes. The voice said, confirming my most leading idea on who the devil was behind the curtain. Technically speaking, he'd done us a solid, but here I was holding his neck down and trying to get more out of him. In my defense, Winterscars are going to Winterscar, which is a flimsy defense, but I'm more than okay with flimsy. What are you doing here, watching over me like this? I asked. You've got to be nearby. I know you've got some way to hide well, and you need to be close enough to contact the local comms. Plus the timing of your call is extremely suspicious, to put it lightly. Right when you know we're heading to the surface next. How long have you been watching Lord Atius and I? The voice hissed again, but answered nonetheless. Mites commanded I bring lantern to you. Traps made near lantern too dangerous. I come to you next. Wait for right time. Right time now. So if you can't drag that box to me, you'll drag me to that box. Yes. The voice said, and then stayed silent. That's all the mites wanted out of you? Really? No. Need to guide Wrath. And you? A guide? For what? Do not know. Tsuya will elaborate. Might command is vague. All right, so whoever this was, he wasn't some kind of mastermind moving things in the background at least. What did the mites tell you, exactly? They spoke, thou shalt guide a betrayer to trap a goddess. The voice said. I do not know how. Only that I am to assist. Tsuya will make things clear. I knew Wrath was working with the mites, she owed them a favor for learning how to heal people. And they clearly guessed she'd eventually have to come talk to Tsuya up on the surface. And now they'd also gotten a guide of some kind, except they didn't fill him in on what he was guiding us to. Mites were weird little critters, all right. There was a clear plan they had in mind, but all I could see were the pieces of it. Did you save us with the hover sled by luck or by order? I watched from away. It did not seem like you would make it. I gave push. Now, you give push. Claim Mite Lantern. Have Feather speak to Tsuya, rekindle the old pact. Uphold old vows. What happens when she does? I do not know. Mites want me to guide you and her down. To where? We find out. Soon. Yerob paused in his run, violet eyes flashing. Alert from the lady. He rumbled to the side, with a tilt of, worry? Think I've seen it all now, a screamer actually worrying about something. To Wrath in danger. The comms call cut out a moment later, clearly not wanting to be part of this. What, did her silver majesty get lost and die or something? Cathida grumbled out on speakers. She's a big girl, she can handle it. Or if she can't, no great loss. No return response. Yerob said, skull head twisting back straight forward while his gait switched from a casual trot to a full-blown sprint. Tamari, ever the smart ass, figured it was a good time to shut up and hold tight or else. Last message, direct SOS. For body retrieval. Lady to Wrath offline. Yerob said while Atius and I matched the sprint without difficulty. Relic armor couldn't outrun drakes, but screamers were within the odds. What do you mean offline? I shouted over the sprint. No return response. Yerob said again, as if that explained everything. Signal offline. Shell 2 damaged to continue operation. Needs to be retrieved. Lord Atius followed behind, closing ranks on our little group, eyes flashing left and right as he sprinted, a hand glued on the hilt of his sword the entire time. Good idea that, if there was something out there that had iced Wrath, 50-50 odds we're about to run into situations that involve a lot of screaming, probably not the good kind, and the usual suspects that come paired with that. Unexpectedly, I didn't feel any sort of panic. Instead, I felt more relief. As if I'd been waiting for this avalanche to trigger this whole time, and now I didn't need to worry about what could be looming over my head like an anvil anymore. Danger was finally about to take its actual shape, and whatever it'll end up as can't possibly be worse than the superimposed black probability void of every possible thing that could go wrong. Wait a moment. Come to think of it, feeling relieved that scrap shit was finally going to stop kicking the snow and actually commit was, probably not a mentally well-adjusted response, if I'm being honest. Maybe my sister was right. I might need to go to therapy at some point. Or, and hear me out on this, or I could just swing a sword and break a few things until I feel better. It's tough times and therapy's expensive. Did the rest of Lady Taratha's army get the same alert? Atius asked as our group cleared past the last meadow and dove into the foliage wall. A few more minutes of fighting against the trees and we'd be reaching the wall end of this pillar, where the bleak outside would open up. No. Only Yerob get message. The machine said, crashing through the branches with little care. Tamari hunkered further down, giving a few choice curses, trying to find a spot that wouldn't end up with her getting whipped off her ride. Why would the lass send a distress signal only to Yerob and not her city? Lord Atius muttered, contemplating. What's the coordinates of the signal? Yerob shared those, the maps showing up in 2 dimensions on our HUDs. The same location that Tuekar had fought and died by. Missing something. Atius muttered. The army stationed in her city is far closer than we are. Even at a full sprint it would take us an hour to make it. Context missing. Signal damaged. Lady may have battled sensitive target. Yerob said, taking a particularly large leap off a boulder that saw him soar over a few dozen feet. Tamari screamed a little louder than anyone had any business being able to do, but fortunately I had a helmet. That way I could record all this and laugh at her later. She tried to bark out a few choice words that I think might have meant slow down or stop you stupid scrap for brains moron, but the constant buckling of her ride racing forward on all fours made it hard for her to get anything in besides an impression of a screeching banshee. Guess what's bothering her will remain a mystery to us all. She didn't just walk around and accidentally have a rock squash her again. If her shell was destroyed, she must have fought against something and lost. I said. Or she finally got eyes bigger than her stomach and ate something she really shouldn't have, like picking the wrong fight. Another feather. Atius said, thinking the same as I did. I've seen the combat footage between her and your sister. The list of enemies that could take on Tarath is small. And we know the machines were going to discover her betrayal sooner or later. Lad, I think we might have reached sooner. So why hasn't she mobilized the city with her distress call? I asked. Only reason I can think of is if she doesn't want her army to know she's been iced. That points to a covert operation instead of a full-scale one. Atius said. Our feather is out of commission, yet the city's cover must still be intact somehow. Or she's sent other messages to General Zong and the rest of the city with different orders, leaving her recover to us. What if it's not a feather at all? What if it's far more mundane than we think? What do you mean? I asked, trying to think of anything else that could kill Wrath. She didn't just fall off a cliff. I'm willing to put down money that won't work on her. Atius shook his head. I'm not in the market to buy a box of snow, lad. Shame. I tugged. Still a chance, you never know. What if it's Deathless behind it all? Atius said, going back to his point. A group of Deathless likely heard of the machine invasion and arrived here to help liberate the city. Working together, they could take on a fully realized feather. Against a newly made feather who hasn't yet locked down her kit, she'd put down a challenge, only not an invincible one. We cleared the forest and raced straight for one of the many cracks on the pillar wall here. Outside was nothing but grey rock and cloudy storms above. Most people wouldn't be too happy to go from a place full of life right into a hellscape like this. Tamari proved to be the exception. She seemed oddly happy now. Not a fan of trees, I think. Make more sense to me than the machines showing up. I said. Zong would be able to talk down a group of Deathless, so long as the entire city's worth of machines aren't clawing out of the woodworks to find their boss. And we'd go grab her body with the authority of another Deathless around. Atius nodded. I hope this is the case, lad. If it's a feather, we'll need to change plans. Quickly. Book 4, Chapter 17, Destruction, T. Tarath watched the enemy from a distance, hands at the hilt of her blades. She'd brought several for this fight. Both her traditional weapons, along with 3 of Keith's custom blades. The other projects he'd been working on had proven incompatible with her own combat style. She lacked the fractal uses he had practiced with. At the small of her back was the Nightbreaker, ready to use in case everything failed. Even if Tarath won the fight, suffocate would return inevitably, with a better idea of what to expect. If Tarath used her trump card early, landing another shot with it in the future would become that much harder. She had to dismantle suffocate with her blades. That looks to be a fair distance. Suffocate said. Most enemies I would have dispatched before they'd gotten this close. And if something gets too close to you? Tarath asked, breath held. I'm not quite sure. Suffocate laughed. I suppose one day I might find out. Do you believe you are fast enough to close the distance? Is that really something you wish to test? Training to speed past a ranged defense is something I will need to learn how to handle in the future. Tarath said, drawing out her primary blades. Having an accurate understanding of my abilities in comparison to other feathers will assist me in fighting other fractal-powered opponents, such as the Deathless. The feather laughed. That's one way to see it. Well then, this elder sister of yours shall do her best to offer a worthwhile lesson. She said, lifting her staff up and pointing it at Tarath. On the other end of the battlefield, Tarath flared out her wings and leaped forward, rock crushing under her as she kicked off. Her wings took on the rest of the power, letting her skim over the surface of the field. Dust and rocks buffeted behind her. Systems showed full green. Estimated time until strike distance at 2.3 seconds. She'd do a slice through, then pivot to bleed off excess speed once she'd passed by to suffocate. Her enemy remained stationary, staff still pointed directly at Darath. The metal plates around her spun faster and faster, then instantly froze in the air, twisting on themselves until the fractal pattern etched on each was clearly visible to Darath. They began to glow. A sonic boom expanded around Darath as she ripped through the sound barrier. Inertia crashed against her system, but she was a feather and her shell resisted the forces of physics with little trouble. 1.9 seconds until target in range. Suffocate smiled. Plates rotated once more, pointing directly at the speeding feather. Darath's vision sharpened, magnified forward to view what was approaching. There she saw 3 of the plates open a tier into reality, a portal of some kind. On the other side was something. She couldn't tell what it was other than it being filled with machinery. The hollow of a cannon barrel? It began to glow. Instinct screamed into Darath's mind and she aborted her direct assault, kicking hard against the ground and leaping up. With Darath's systems at full power, she saw the destruction in slow motion. 3 blue beams lanced out of each portal onto Suffocat's plates. They expanded into existence with a deafening roar, cutting directly through the air far faster than matter could move. The very ground under it instantly blackened, burned from the expanding heat from each beam. A moment later, the rock bent as the superheated air caused a shockwave outward, crushing itself against the ground. Air surrounding each beam combusted next, obscuring the entire battlefield in flames trailing behind each beam. Rock broke apart, the heat differential too much for the granite. The result tore apart the ground under the beams not even a moment after the initial shockwave radiated out of the beam paths, leaving a trail of destruction under each beam. At the center of the maelstrom, Suffocat's staff hummed and glowed. A massive occult semi-shield leaped into existence, intercepting the heat waves generated by the firing beams so close to the feather's shell. Where Suffocate stood, a semicircle etched on the ground divided the world between blackened broken shale and untouched land. Nice dodge. Suffocate sent in an instant communication. But do note I have 24 plates. Even as the message was sent, Suffocate's staff once more lifted, tracking Darath in the air while 3 different plates twisted on themselves, pointing at Darath. Combat systems within the feather lit up, already creating algorithms to predict and warn her of danger. Lock-on triggers flashed red across her vision. All 3 new plates were now facing directly where she'd be. Darath sent out more commands to her wing system, relying on its agility to dodge against the beams. 3 more lances of bright blue shot out from Suffocate's position, racing straight at Darath, and each she narrowly ducked and wove in between. It worked. But it hadn't mattered. The residual heat from each beam had been massive, enough to burn the very air, leaving behind a shockwave of superheated air crashing against her shields and throwing her around like a puppet cut from her strings. Shields down to 70%. Given the estimated energy of the beams, a direct hit would slice through Darath's shields as if they weren't there. In the air, she reoriented herself, and forced her system forward, blades ready. Suffocate refused to move, eyebrow raised as if curious. Her staff twisted into a defensive position, the metal slivers lighting up with occult edges. More red warning signals blared out in Darath's mind, showing more plates had locked onto her position. They didn't fire, instead remaining on standby, the occult fractals glowing on each. Darath took the chance and dove for her enemy. The 2 feathers crossed paths. With both blades, Darath sliced forward, a quick combo of attacks that maximized the time she had before inertia of her speed ripped her away from melee distance. The attack was repelled by Suffocate's staff, parts of the occult slivers moving to block Darath's swords. They failed to hold off Darath's swords for long, pushed back against the feather's staff. A standard shield lit up, taking the hits. And Darath was speeding past the feather, momentum forcing her onwards. Her leg hit the ground, crushing it in a line as she tried to slow herself down to strike again. Target locks blared in her mind again, and she heard the sound of charging energy behind her. Instantly, Darath leaped forward into the air again, aborting her attempt to force Suffocate into melee. Her reaction was too delayed, and too predictable. 3 more beams howled into existence, 2 striking where Darath had stood. The 3rd had been aimed upwards, where Suffocate predicted Darath would leap. Desperate, Darath twisted on herself as fast as she could, watching in mute horror as a blue beam bisected part of her torso, and nicked her arm. Her shield hadn't been triggered to mitigate that damage, damage control systems knowing power needed to be reserved for the approaching heatwave that would hit next. Not a moment too soon. The blast wave of the beam smashed into her, shields flaring out to prevent the destruction. The parts where the beam had cut through were a different story, that closed to her chassis, the damage was behind her shield's range. Heat and crushing pressure differentials ripped through her shell, breaking far more inside her than the beam had cut. Redundant systems took over command, keeping her still in operation. Speed and combat efficiency recalculated in her mind to show she'd lost a massive 57% efficiency. The heatwave flowed through her veins, melting parts of her system and infecting others with cascading damages. She needed to win, right now. Tarath ignored the damage report, twisted further on herself and made a swift swing downwards on her enemy. Her right hand tossed her blade directly at Tisefit in a gamble to blind her eyes for a moment. The feather scoffed, flicking her extended staff and swatting the thrown weapon out of the way. Tarath landed a moment later, right hand drawing out one of Keith's strange swords. The first two hook swords she'd brought with her weren't the right choice for this opponent. Tisefit's staff moves and swayed with blows, she couldn't pin down and trap the occult edges with Keith's hook swords. But the third weapon she'd brought might have more potential. It was a thin rod, hardly stable, outright jiggling. A lighter version of a fencing foil, according to Tarath's database of swords. The whipping rod lit up bright occult blue as the thin edge etched into it complied with the fractal of division engraved into the hilt. Tarath struck with the weapon in a direct thrust. Tisefit brought her staff once more to parry the strike, except that Tarath flicked the hilt of her new weapon at the last moment. The rod bent, curving around Tisefit's staff, and digging directly into the feather's personal shields. Tisefit had no choice, the attack would have otherwise cut directly into her forehead. Interesting weapon. The feather sent. Now it's this elder sister's turn to show off. A cold pulsed around the feather and a massive spherical shield burst into existence. It hit against Tarath like a metal wall, bouncing her and her weapon backwards. Tisefit's staff moved, twirling around into an uppercut. Wind flowed behind it, unnaturally strong, lifting Tarath and hundreds of broken rock chunks under them far into the air, some of which had to weigh more than a few hundred pounds. More target locks lit up in Tarath's mind. She hardly had time to trigger her wings before three more beams launched out, in staggered attacks. The first she dodged, tanking the shockwave with what was left of her shield. The second was more narrowly dodged as Tarath collided against one of the larger rocks, preventing her full escape. Her shield fractured against the heatwave of this one, override systems showing red in half her shell's systems. Redundant systems were being burned out one at a time, until none were left. Somehow, she was still functioning despite that. The third beam cut directly through her stomach, the shockwave expanding out inside and ripping her apart from the inside out. Wing systems failed, decohesion imminent as the metal feathers disconnected from her broken systems. Everything under her torso turned into a black void from her diagnostics. Still attached, but the connections far too severed to continue working. It was fun. Tisefit said. And I haven't had to use my full occult shield against a melee opponent before. You're quite quick. Not quick enough. Tarath sent back, systems fighting against her control. Everything wanted to shut down for repairs, although she could already tell those repairs would never come. Her nanite swarms were all showing heavy damage. She knew if she allowed her shell to attempt a reboot, she wouldn't wake up in the same body. If she ever woke up again. No, not quite quick enough. The enemy agreed, a sad smile on her features. Tarath raged, fighting against her own shell. She couldn't let herself die here. Leaving the city to Tisefit would see thousands die, both humans and machine. Faces and names flashed through her mind. It can't end like this. Not done yet. Tarath sent back, grabbing hold of her override systems and freezing it in place, feeling a surge of anger and spite keep her awake as she tumbled out of the sky. There was still one more thing she could do. One last hope. You really should know when to give up. Tisefit tut. As you are now, it'll take a few hours at a might forge to fix you up. If you keep going, I really will end up destroying your shell. I refuse to die. Tarath sent back. If I hit anywhere near your chest, the shockwave will break your fractals, you know? This fight is quite over. You'll be automatically thrown into the reserve fractals down below one way or another. Tarath didn't answer. Instead, her shaking hand reached for the weapon still tucked away behind the small of her back. Parts of the grenade launcher had melted off, but the weapon still showed yellow. Serviceable. Time froze like amber as Tarath flared out her overrides, letting the heat assault her shell in full. Her body fell down softly in the slowed time, wing parts straining against their damage, twisting and orienting her fall. Tarath unlocked the safety trigger on the Nightbreaker round. The weapon's internal mechanics groaned as parts of it were twisted in the heat waves, but Tarath was a feather and her fingers were strong enough to bend metal. The safety correctly clicked off. Her fall straightened, no longer a tumble downwards. Green lit up on her fire control systems as her aim locked onto target. Her hand steadied. Tisefit looked calmly on, aware of the ringing lock-on within her own systems. A human weapon of some kind, she identified. That wouldn't pose a threat, except Tarath seemed ready to gamble it all on this. Experience whispered into Sefit's ears to take the threat seriously. 4 plates behind her began humming again, aimed directly at Tarath. She wouldn't allow for half measures this time. Her staff moved forward, the white occult shield appearing at the tip to protect her body from the terrible destruction about to be unleashed. I warned you, little sister. Nothing remains behind. The message sent out. There wasn't a sign of mercy in Sefit's eyes. I will. Tarath sent back. One shot was all she had. She thought of Keith, and put her faith into his creation. The trigger clicked in her hand. The deadly round exploded out of the barrel, crawling forward in both their perception, as if struggling through dense water. Too slow. Far too slow. But Keith had learned from his last shot. He'd improved the weapon. Behind the round, a smaller explosion occurred a half-second after the round cleared the barrel. Fire ripped the panels behind the round, sputtered for a half-moment and then roared, turning the round into a small rocket. It raced forward, cutting against the air. Trailing flame and smoke behind it like a vengeful phoenix, barreling down at the enemy feather. The plates on Tisefit rearranged, locking onto Tarath's falling shell, while the Nightbreaker continued past the halfway point between them. She aimed her staff directly at the incoming round, the domed occult shield crackling with power. The round collided a moment later against Tisefit's side, the front section crushing itself against the unyielding occult wall. Glowing chains erupted from all sides as the round triggered its deadly payload. The chains whipped out in the air, before descending down against the shield, wrapping around, while the central round chamber stubbornly continued pushing against the barrier, fuel still not completely spent. The chains connected. The shield flickered, resisting the onslaught with a screech while Tisefit's arm held the staff still. The feather remained rooted in place, a cold pulsing around her while the shield held off Keith's weapon. Portals appeared on the plates, behind Tarath saw the maw of destruction in each. Expertly aimed. The target alert systems within Tarath's system were still somehow active, barking out warnings, lock-on signs painting her vision red. But the enemy shield hadn't broken yet. It glowed brighter, occult lighting crackling against the destructive chains whipping and sliding across the surface. A half-second passed. Tarath watched, helpless. There was nothing else she could do now but pray. The shield flickered, occult pulsing brighter. The round sliding off tilt, parts of it crushing a second time as the backup material's integrity failed inside the round. Trapped between an unbreakable shield and a micro-rocket still raging forward. Plates floating by Tisefit's side opened up, 4 grinning maws, destruction hiding behind each. Tarath wasn't going to make it. Tisefit's shield broke all at once, shattering into pieces. The feather's eyes widened in utter shock. The Nightbreaker round dove freely forward like a hungry predator, screeching a cry of vengeance, half crushed yet still alive enough to seek its original target, if not quite on the same exact trajectory. It didn't need to be accurate at this range. The enemy feather's eyes continued to widen, combat routines letting her view the destruction in slow motion. Those chains had cut apart an occult shield made to protect her from the backlash of her beams. Her personal shields would stand absolutely no chance against something like this. She took a half-step back, too little and far too late. Violet eyes locked back up on Tarath's tumbling shell. My, how curious. Seems I was the one learning a lesson today. Tisefit sent, emotions inscribed in the message reading as oddly bemused. Well done, little sister. I see why the lady picked up a stray like you. The round struck the side of her chest. A standard full-body shield triggered on impact, holding the round off easily. Up until all 4 chains lovingly wrapped around her. They curled around in a deadly embrace, held for only a microsecond before the personal shield utterly failed. And then those chains cut right through her chassis, ripping it into pieces. She didn't utter a word as the occult edges sliced through, the IFF signal instantly going silent as all her subsystems failed catastrophically. Inside, Tisefit's Unity fractal lit up and the connected soul fled through it back into the safety of a faraway backup. Her empty shell was left behind, shutting down. A moment later, a loose chain whipped through the soul fractal that had once housed Tisefit. The occult plates around the dead feather trembled, completely unmoored from any commands, but still powered and active. Decohesion began to take hold, gravity wrapping around the plates and forcing them back down to the earth. Target locks lifted off Taratha's vision. And then the plates followed their last given command, and opened fire, blindly. 4 beams lit up and launched out of each, ripping apart the air and anything in the way. One still too close to Taratha's falling shell, cutting another hole into her broken wing, the following shockwave shredding the wing into pieces. The other 3 missed her entirely, the heat still close enough to burn and melt parts of her artificial skin as she tumbled out of the sky. A moment passed as the portals on each plate powered off, the beams closing off, and the air was still again save for the sound of plates falling onto the ground, automatic counterintelligence systems triggering meltdowns on each. Diagnostic systems ran amok through Taratha's systems. Red returned near everywhere. Leg, arm, torso, chest, and wing systems all eliminated out of existence. Her neuromorphic system was overheating beyond the safety region, especially with the last 4 beams having come far too close. All non-IT command and control nodes were in states of red and orange. Most of her backup systems had been obliterated already. One eye had melted along with a majority of subcuticle muscles within that side of her face. Her neck couldn't move anymore, the artificial muscles within all showing red. But one eye still functioned. She moved it, searching for Tisefit's empty shell. She could see her. A stunned expression stretched frozen on Tisefit's half-severed head. The feather collapsed on her knees, remaining still for a moment before she fell apart. Keith's Nightbreaker round had sliced through her torso in a deadly hug, striking into the ground under her right after, and crushing itself for good against it. Occult chain moorings had been shattered as well from the impact, instantly turning off the power, leaving the chains to fly off, still bouncing all over the battlefield. But it had worked. Tisefit had been stopped, and Taratha was still alive. She continued falling down, time returning back to normal as her systems began the process of a full shutdown in a desperate attempt to stop the damage from piling up further. It didn't matter, she'd done it. She'd won. A distress signal was sent to Urob, and acknowledged a fraction of a moment later. Only then did she dare let go. Her system flatlined, crashing like plates down against her mind, an angry wave of cool blue washing over the raging inferno inside her mind, submerging everything in the way, leaving steam and bubbles behind. There was no pain. No senses. Everything turned dark. By the time her shell hit the ground, Taratha had been whisked into the depths of her soul fractal, the only thing remaining powered, while her systems failed to reboot. Error messages showcasing too much damage, but still trying to restart despite it all. One by one, they shut down, as more and more nodes went dark, capacitors discharged completely. Soon, there was nothing left to even send a reboot signal. This is fine. Help is on the way. Taratha thought at the edge of the abyss, holding on to hope. I can trust them. Darkness loomed around her, she fell into its open jaws. Book 4, Chapter 18, Run with the Winnings. Our little group of 4, or 5 if you include our shy mysterious machines stalking around somewhere, made their way across the desolate plains of the undercity surroundings. Once outside a pillar, the area was about as welcoming as the frieze upstairs. Give and take a few things. Air was nice enough not to murder anything without a 40-pound suit out here, but nothing grew on pure rock. The surface that at least had frost bloom. The inhospitable ambience only grew as we came closer to Rath's last known location. Massive rips in the ground showed evidence of renewed fighting, and not occult arc pulses that Tuekar had used. Instead it looked more like the hand of the gods had hit the ground with a bat and then dragged the bat across the snow for a mile onwards in one direction. Repeated a few times for good measure. At the center point of these lines, was what looked to be machine parts. Urob easily vaulted over the last few bits of rocks before sprinting across. The lady. Damaged. He said, slowing down to a trot, before those lanky arms reached forward to pull someone up. No guessing who the broken figure was. Rath looked like she'd just ended the fight with Tuekar, again. Only this time her shell was mostly still intact. There was a large hole right in her stomach, bits of metal still glowing red on the inside. One wing was completely gone, not even dangling limply on the side unlike the other. She still had both her legs attached, though they hung limply in the air. Yerob brought her close to his chest like a protective guardian while Atias and I came to a stop nearby. Another feather. The Deathless noted, pointing at the ruined remains of more machine parts. A lot of metal plates littered the ground, along with a few sliced-up body parts. Each of the plates looked like acid had been splashed over and melted down parts of it. The body parts didn't seem to have any damage other than being cleanly sliced, evidence of an occult blade dealing the damage. I followed behind, walking over to a separated head and shoulder, kneeling down to turn the victim over. If anyone had any doubts Wrath hadn't turned on the machines, this would be the signed documents and seal. Lord Atias took a look as the dead feather's remains. No one I know of. Given there isn't a war happening at the city right now, I suspect this feather must be some kind of scout that Wrath intercepted by herself. There was a grim note in his voice. We need to get Wrath back online to get the story, I said, looking over at the feather cradled in Yerob's hands. Tamari was hovering over, craning her neck to get a good view over the machine's spinal fins. They both looked utterly worried in different ways. Even without any moving facial features, the panic in the screamer's movements and posture was as clear as sunlight. Every bit of his focus was firmly on her. She's not waking up, Tamari said, turning over to us. Yerob's trying a lot of different pings and tech stuff, except nothing's sinking in. Her shell's too damaged, he's saying. There was an unworded plea for help in her voice. Atias gave a quick unworded order to me with a tilt of his head while he continued to examine the dead feather's shell. He didn't need to ask me twice, I was already on my way over, reaching into the soul fractal to look into Wrath's broken shell with new eyes. Almost every bit of circuitry inside her system looked to have been rattled by a seismic event of some kind. Damage was everywhere, even on the small scale. Few things had power, and if it did, the connections didn't go out far before the power wires disconnected. But there was a ray of luck looking out for us, her soul fractal was still lit up, backup energy from a tiny source under the plate active. I could send out a tendril and talk to her, which gave me a second wind of relief I didn't know had been knotting inside. It didn't take a lot of power to keep a fractal active, whatever the occult used as fuel, electricity wasn't the main driver. Only the on-off switch. With this, she could remain alive for a good few years. There was time to fix this, somehow. I, for one, like her new look. Cathida said, ever the thorn in everyone's side. Why stop at the stomach? She should go for a few more holes in her chest, head, and legs. More holes, the less you need to share with the rest of the socket lickers. Is there absolutely nothing sacred for you? I hissed out, not in the mood for Cathida's Cathidaing. What do you think? The old voice gripped. She's a goddess-cursed machine. Enemy of my enemy is my enemy. The real Cathida would have outright tried to slit this feather throat while she's sleeping on that stone throne of hers, no rules held sacred. Journey doesn't care much, but I'm obligated to spit on her grave if I get the chance. One less feather is a good thing, two is even bet I see those menus you're opening, you little scrap shit. Fine. Go ahead, I dare you. Mute me you Ogios neophyte craven cow. Her voice shut off without even a squawk. The settings clicked green as I navigated the panel closed. This time I muted her for a few hours. The simmering rage under my heart slowed down as I took a few more breaths. Things were okay. Wrath was alive, if trapped within her soul fractal for now. Her shell was a machine, not a human. It could be repaired, unlike humans. And whatever she'd done here, it had worked. There wasn't a foreign machine army on the city's doorstep. Other than the dead scout, nothing else seemed amiss. It reminded me to add another fractal spell on my long list of things I needed to learn, Wrath's ability to heal humans. Today, she was the one that needed healing, and fortunately that was something we could do. Tomorrow? Tomorrow it might be my sister, or a Winterscar night at death's door. And there was no wrench or bolt nuts that could fix that. One thing at a time, I muttered, trying to organize what to do next. The plan snapped into place. I turned to the Deathless. Can we grab the scout's chest plate? Inside there should be a fractal connected to a few others. Whatever spells this scout has, we might be able to collect it. Atias nodded, his occult blade lit up and expertly cutting a large section of the dead body's central plate. Tamari pointed at the square plates on the ground. How's about these? She asked. They got weird designs on them. I think this is what you called a fractal. She'd had it right, those plates were absolutely occult-based. I yanked one out of the broken shale, giving it a look over. Steel plate, 1 foot by 1 foot, some kind of circuitry inside it, along with a power source. The green golden liquid was still present inside from what I saw with the soul sight, but there was some kind of acid damage left behind on the surface fractal, smearing the whole thing. A few empty pockets made me think the acid had been a self-sabotage of some kind. While I'd been examining the wreckage, Lord Atius finished bringing together the sliced-through chest plate fractals, which didn't look anywhere near promising. Half melted. He sighed. Useless to us. The weapon that struck Wrath must have also had splash damage on this feather. I believe this lass here had her shields broken, and sliced through by one of your Nightbreaker rounds. My Nightbreaker round was used here. I asked, but realized the damage on the feather added up to exactly that. Swords tended to cut in a straight line. Wild chains flaying about cut in really odd patterns. Atius pointing his sword at a bit of wreckage on my left, further off. There, I saw the remains of a very familiar chain. The round must have broken apart somehow, but not before completing its mission. Had to seriously work on their survivability. That was twice they'd been used, and both times saw them broken apart into a mess. Journey began to highlight the possible parts, already knowing we weren't going to leave evidence behind for the machines to pick up. After your round finished slicing up the chest plate, something caused parts of her system to melt. If I had to guess, the same that hit Wrath and just as close. Or the wrong thing was sliced through. Shame, if it had been just your Nightbreaker chains doing the damage, we could have put the fractal back together like a puzzle. Well, least we got the strange flat metal plates that surrounded the dead feather. Journey, can you use those nanomachines inside your system to fix her up? I asked the armor, moving on with what was important. Negative. Schematics missing. The monotone voice answered back, which hadn't surprised me. I figured armors couldn't fix up Wrath, so that hadn't came as too much of a surprise. We need to get Wrath to a Might Forge. I said, already going to plan B. Will we have the time for this? Atius asked, looking up to the roof far, far above us, where ice and snow would begin to appear. His point was simple, even in those few words. The raiders would be attacking the clan city soon. And while he'd left a good amount of weapons like those swords I had commissioned along with a handful of Nightbreaker rounds, it was still better to crush the raiders into the ground than to give them a chance to harm people. Trust but verify. All we need is to fix her up enough that her systems reboot and she can handle the rest herself. I said. Feathers have self-repair features, if I remember right. We don't need to wait long at a forge, Undersiders have a lot of notes about how they operate, it shouldn't take any time at all. Get her there, and then we go straight to the surface. By the time we're up at the meeting point, she'll have all the time she needs to finish her repairs again. But if we go now, when we come back down, it might be a different picture. As in, there might be an army of machines between the Might Forges and us. War was on the edge of breaking out now, both above ground and below. Atius considered the argument for a moment, before nodding. I owe her this much. He simply said. The clan will survive. You and your escorts could depart early. I said. The Winterscar Knights and I could take the detour end. Lad. Atius said, a hand landing on my shoulder. It took a feather to kill a feather. And now, you do not have a feather to spare. If you are ambushed by another feather sent out to recover this scout, or the scout herself come back from the dead with a vengeance to settle, you'll need me and every knight we have. I know what I said, I'll see that Wrath is healed at a Might Forge, and return to the surface only after. You have my oath on this. Somehow the sincerity and goodwill behind those words hit me, as if it wiggled a blade right under a wall of ice I'd been unknowingly building up. I turned back to Urob quickly before I got too emotional. The stress of everything was getting to me. First thing I'd do when I got back up to the surface was have a nice long bath with friends and some good isopod surface staples. Food, drink, good company, and time to wind down. That's what I needed. After I got Wrath back on her feet. We'll follow. Urob said. No way. No, Atius said. Your people need to begin their own escape. I don't know how long we'll be topside with Wrath before she finds and speaks to Tsuya. She might not return with your means to escape for months. Until then, you and the machines need to scatter away from the city. Hide among the other machines in the sector. They'll need someone to lead them through this. Both Tamari and Urob stared at the Deathless as his words sunk in. Then, Urob nodded and hobbled over to me, walking on two legs, hunched over Wrath's shell. His hands stretched out carefully to me. How will human find and use Might Forge? Yerob asked. Wrath's been picked by the Mites as a champion. I said. They'll work with us. I'm sure of it. Might Forges work on deals and barters, but they're still Mites in the end. And, left unmentioned, we did technically have a guide hired already. I'll just be making use of him before we meet Tsuya. If he complains about it, too bad. Yerob nodded, half-skull looking me in the eyes, as if judging my mettle and finding it of acceptable quality. Take good care of the lady, the machine said, gingerly dropping Wrath in my arms. Both eyes were closed, and she looked more like a corpse than a still-living machine. The only thing that kept me from thinking otherwise was the pulsing fractal still alive and well deep inside, just under her throat. We go hide. We wait for return. Yerob said, turning to the city in the distance. Tamari gave me a nod as well, the sort of you better not fuck this up, or else glare I was well and familiar with. Made me feel almost homesick in a way. This would be the second time I'd be carrying Wrath around. Poor Feather couldn't catch a break either, so we were both stuck in the same expedition. The girl weighed nothing to journey, relic armor making it easy work. Despite what Cathida thought about machines, it wasn't going to hamper a rescue effort. A part of me knew journey itself held no malice to Wrath, like Cathida's engram had said. It was just playing a role, like an actor, following the script that a long-dead crusader would have said. Cathida had fought machines her whole life, and died for it. Her hatred for them ran far deeper than surface dwellers who hardly ever ran into machines. Even our knights only came across them on missions underground, which wasn't an everyday occurrence. Undersiders were oddly in the same airspeeder on this. Their knights mostly handled domestic issues within the city. They'd hate petty criminals far more than machines. Closest to crusaders were the power hunters, who ventured out to track down and kill machines for power cells to fuel the city. I don't think those folks hated machines, in the same way that agri-farmers hated the crops they grew. It was simply a part of life. Not so for the imperial forces who strove day and night to fight off the machines. Driven by faith and vengeance for their destroyed empire. To undersiders and surface clans, feathers were a mythical thing, only known in stories and seen rarely. To imperial crusaders, they're less myth and far more real. Cathida at least tolerated me being friends with Wrath. Everything considered, it was oddly progressive of the old bat. The group quickly turned to a sprint back to the city, this time carrying parts of the destroyed feather along with Wrath. All the while I sent out a small tendril of soul down to reach Wrath's fractal. Machines couldn't reach out with the soul, similar to how Deathless couldn't either, but I could. So I did. Wrath? I asked, prodding at the fractal. Inside, I found only a world of darkness, the soul curled up deep inside. Keith? She whispered back, sluggishly. You came. The link felt weak. Alone in the soul fractal, Wrath felt fragile, like a candle in the dark. Course I would. I said, starting to feel worry creep into my system again. Didn't you ring for a ride home? You call, we do the lifting. No refunds though. Inside the soul fractal, the world re-emerged. She'd been sleeping up until I reached out, or some kind of coma. Color flowed around us as her concept of a body faded back into reality. Inside the soul fractal, the concept of her soul really did feel like something stepping the line between human and machine. It was oddly comforting. Warm in a way. She wasn't quite a machine here, with her shell mostly dead. All the calculating bits of her weren't there. But the concept of her soul and identity was still well and alive. A facsimile of what her shell would have been doing had it still been online. I wasn't sure if the soul here was the genuine Wrath, or if the shell was. Maybe both? She'd only returned to life when I came in contact. What exactly were machine souls in the first place? The city needs to be evacuated. It needs to. She said, eyes trying to focus on me, not quite fully awake yet. What exactly happened? I asked, trying to help stabilize her mind, get her back on her feet in a manner of speaking. It seemed to work. When Yerob and the crew here showed up, we found you in a heap along with broken bits of another feather. I'm taking a wild guess she wasn't a friend. Relinquished sent 3 feathers to investigate Tuekar's disappearance. One came by alone, the other 2 are somewhere else. Wrath said, voice growing stronger, more lucid with each second. I asked for a spar with this one, her name was Tesefit. Managed to destroy her shell, however she will be back. This suffocate was a full feather? Not one with a broken hand and half her ribs sticking out by the time you met. Wrath nodded. She was powerful, yet in a different manner compared to Tuekar. Who'd win in a fight? I asked. The dead bastard had bragged about being built to kill gods. He'd been an assassin of sorts. That there might be more of his kind, and stronger, might be something to worry about. Pitted against him, she would have easily been defeated. Wrath said, noticing my growing fears. She passed through bits of her memory through the link. Massive beams of energy skirting by, heat stinging at my cheeks. A final one punching through my stomach, rattling my bones and blood even as a distant memory. Putting every bit of hope and trust I had into a last chance untested weapon I hadn't seen used before. Wrath's point of view on all this was horrifying. Great stuff, I'll be seeing that in my nightmares, thanks Wrath. Oh, I am sorry. I didn't mean. It's fine. Not my memory. Rather, I had to hand it to Wrath. Machines built to fight didn't get traumatized easily by watching their own shell broken apart limb by limb. Oddly enough, what terrorized Wrath the most in those short bursts of memory was the fear of failure. Specifically, what would happen to those she'd grown to care about if she failed here. Like watching a more disturbing video media, except living through it. I said, brushing off the thoughts. I didn't know how to whistle, but in the soul realm it was all concepts. I was great at imagining I could whistle, and that's all that counted here. The fight had been brutal, short, and decisive. And here I thought you'd talked your way out of it, asked her nicely to explode. Wrath frowned for a half second before realizing through the connection my actual intentions. An excellent idea. She drolly said, arms crossed. The next time I confront suffocate, I will do that instead of challenging her to a fight. Would surely spare me great difficulty. There we go, that's the can-do attitude I remember. You did good though. I said, soothing over her lingering panic by sending positive intentions through the link. How'd you know you could land a Nightbreaker round on her like that? I thought they'd move fast enough to get out of the way of those. I played on her pride. She didn't like to move if she could avoid it. And she believed her shields to be with intolerances against any human weaponry. Oh, so this time, you were the one playing tricks in a fight. Learned from the best, I said, giving her a cheeky thumbs up. She froze for a moment, unable to pick between getting angry or feeling smugly proud of having outfoxed a full feather. Wrath settled for a pout and huff. Can you control your repair swarm? I asked her, changing the subject. She shook her head. I am unable to turn on anything beyond the low power mode. If I were any other feather, I'd need to abandon this shell and have another made. As you know, I cannot do that. I do not believe Mother will have a new shell available before she discovers what I've been doing. Those feathers are too close to us now. Please, you need to help me. I can't repair this shell by myself anymore. The majority of my functions are unresponsive. I'm trapped within this soul fractal until the moment it powers down. Don't worry. I said, we're here now. Take a break and let me handle the rest from here. We're going back to the city to meet up with my knights. After that, Yerob is going to organize the machines to disperse and go into hiding. General Zong and Tamari can handle moving the humans out of the city and follow the evacuation plan. Lord Atius and the rest of his knights are coming with me. We'll be going to a might forge to have you fixed up enough. After that, straight to the surface. Soul to soul I could feel her emotions bubble over. What had originally been fear and panic had faded over into weary relief, and trust. Telling her everything was going to work out had helped soothe her like snow piled over an electric fire. Sometimes, that's all people need. Someone else to say things will work out. I untangled my soul tether and felt her fractal dim back into unconscious. It looks like without a system to connect to, an artificial soul became lethargic. More asleep than alive. Which was completely opposite to a human soul. There'd be some work to do the moment we got back. Yerob was already contacting the machines, while Tamari was writing the signal to send a message to General Zong. At the rate things were going, we wouldn't even reach the city gates. Kedra and the Surface Knights would be meeting us halfway there, having split up to rip apart my workshop for a list of items I'd be sending them, along with all the rations needed for an expedition. We'd depart directly on path to the nearest might forge while the rest of the city would handle itself. Wrath was right. With suffocate poking her nose around here now, we'd officially ran out of time. And I've always believed in running with my winnings. Not about to change that motto now. And yet, as we sprinted across the barren ground, my head wasn't focused on that. Instead it was on the weight at my arms, slight as it was. Wrath seemed almost at peace, sleeping away without a care. She trusted me. I could sense it in the soul fractal, there's no hiding any kind of emotion. It wasn't in a small way either. Out of everyone she knew, I somehow ended up as the one she trusted the most. Part of it had come about by reputation, what had I done and built. A grudging admiration at having beaten her, despite knowing I should have had next to no chance to win back then. And then I'd pulled the same feat off against Tuekar. But a good chunk of that trust had grown over the time we'd spent together, talking about random topics and finding food to eat around the city. The training we'd started working on together in the digital sea. Things that would have given her no reason to trust me over far more competent people like Kedra or Father, but somehow did. I had no idea how that ended up being a thing, considering trusting me of all people was probably the worst idea possible, but here she was. All naive and willing to go with some scrap-rat castaway fumbling around being a knight and making things up as I went. Once I'm done helping her through all this, I'll point and laugh at her for blindly trusting I was at all a good choice in the first place. Yeah, that'll show her. Book 4, Chapter 19, Interlude, Tuevelis. This was it. This was the most probable location according to his research. With alacrity, Tuevelis vaulted over the last of the rocks and came to a stop at the shoreline, where rolling cubes undulated over each other, mimicking waves. The might sea stretched before him, split apart only by small arpeggio islands, looming like mountains in the distance. Everything else remained deceptively flat, the sea at a constant level. A virtual data line sent a ping to his systems. Tisefit's voice appeared. My, how bold. Are you sure you want to be stirring trouble with a place like this? If the sea nicks even a single toe of yours, it might gobble you right up and not let you leave. And then you'll be stuck like me, waiting in line for a shell. Why are you even here taking such a risk? A feather was killed. Tuevelis said to his dead sister. Feathers die all the time. I'm dead right now, why is this one so important? Tuekar isn't. It is the manner he was killed that is important. Not even the Unity fractal shows a hint of his existence anywhere on the world. Whatever can kill a feather so permanently is a threat. I don't fight threats that could potentially kill me like this without research and a plan. Ah, but we don't know if he was destroyed or simply running away. Tisefit countered, although they both knew better. A destroyed feather would have remained in the digital sea, waiting for Mother to allocate resources to crafting a new shell. A feather running away was only delaying the inevitable. Regardless of where they hid, the Unity fractal would reveal they're still alive somewhere in the world and the hunt would never end. Machines had eternity to live, the fleeing feather only needed to fail a single time across all those years. Defeat was inevitable. And yet, Tuekar's Unity fractal showed only darkness when Tuevelis had requested to verify. That feather was either completely destroyed, or he had found a way to hide from Mother's fractal. One of those two options was impossible. It seems counterintuitive to be worried for your shell and then come here of all places. Tisefit said. Let Tuorda handle your protection. That is his role after all, he's quite good at it. Perhaps not against the entirety of the Might Sea, but one can never know. He has surprised me before. Before Tuevelis, the sea stretched wide. Roiling with billions of small cubes, constantly moving like water. He kicked a small rock by his foot into the churning cubes, watching it fly off, bouncing once against the hard cubes, before being caught in a random dip. A wave passed by, lifting the rock and cubes up. The rock tumbled between the cubes and sank out of view. By the time gravity would have pulled the bits of rock down to the bottom of the Might Sea, it would have been pulverized into fine sand. The Might Sea has something I want, he said. And I know enough about this location to keep myself safe. Combat on the Might Sea was well catalogued. Any entity that landed on its surface had seconds to kick themselves up and out of it, or be caught by a wave. A single stumble was all that the cubes needed to drag down a victim, the cubes powerful enough to crush even the strongest machine alloys. The sea shifted, responding to his probing. It all began as bubbling blocks all across the sea, rising up like fountains. Structures of different eras assembled from the churning cubes, half complete and pushed up, constructed dynamically in the moment. Hundreds of cubes fell off the sides, like water dripping down from the looming structures. A newly made bridge of voxel cubes stretched before him, inviting him forward. Daring him to cross. More structures in the distance were breaking the ceiling, rising up. What looked to be a cathedral with hundreds of walkways and open gates, a massive maze of open terrain. The Sea's challenge. To cross, one would need to make it through whatever gauntlet lay in that distance. He was certain more structures would rise and break the moment he stepped foot, forcing him to sprint or jump, or even run across the sea ground itself to the next safe point. He wasn't here for that. The prize he wanted wasn't something the sea would wish to offer him. To suffocate. Do you know the term proto-feather? Making up words now, are we? To suffocate answered, watching through his optic feed. It was understandable his siblings didn't know the term. He had only found out himself a few days ago, during his research. You know of the first generation? Of course. Only feather directly named by Mother herself. Abdication. She said, as if reciting a speech from memory. What of him? That wasn't his original name. Tuovilus said. Ah? What was his true name then? A57. There was a pause. Tusuffit likely had expected something that matched the current naming schemes feathers followed. A strange name. I take it he didn't pick that name either. That's besides the point. Note the number system. It suggests that the first generation wasn't composed of only him. There were 56 others before him. Prototypes, you say? Likely failed ones, I assume. Tusuffit mused. The test prototypes before abdication was made? Someone as powerful as he must have had quite a legacy of prior attempts, I suppose. Yes. Those were known as the proto-feathers, they were the true first generation. And they were fully functioning. She hummed. That is all fascinating trivia, little brother, but this elder sister of yours fails to understand where you are going with this. If you would so kindly skip forward. Have you studied Tuekar's operational records? He asked instead, then forwarded one of the logs that remained from their original target. It loaded up into both their memories. How? The feather stuttered, staring down a human knight, error log still reporting damage to his superstructure. A12's dead. How did you recover his chain? I saw him cast it into the Might Sea, 7 entire levels below, right before we killed him. He paused the recording, and replayed it. Tusuffit was quiet for a moment. A12? She asked, now getting it. Tuekar fought against abdication's prototypes? That makes little sense. Some kind of competition between the second generation and the prototypes. I went through the same thoughts myself. Tuovilus confessed, taking the time to verify integrity to his occult fractals in the meantime. The job they needed to perform in order to navigate through the Might Sea was critical. If they weren't aligned perfectly, he would die in the next few minutes. It would be within Mother's model of operation to pit prototypes against prototypes and select the winner as the one to move forward with. She's done this in the digital sea already. The module loaded into view and began crunching numbers. While he waited, he spoke. I went searching for the name. I found a match to the keyword within our archives, the older ones from 7 centuries ago. He wasn't quite honest here. He hadn't found a match. Not until he started looking for the term within locked archives. He knew it must have existed somewhere, Tuekar wouldn't have called out for something that didn't exist. Tusuffit remained quiet on the line, listening in. This is where I discovered the proto-feathers I spoke about earlier. I'll forward you what I found. The data uplink came up and showed full transfer of files. Within moments Tusuffit was up to date. And horrified. These proto-feathers betrayed Mother? Turned against our own. They did. And I suspect it is happening again. Tarath. The woman said, voice growing cold. You had better be extremely certain about this. I rather liked my little Hellion. I am near certain. Too many data points point directly to this conclusion. Numbers finished their verification. Everything showed green. The newly installed occult fractals remained in working condition since his initial tests. Now he would put them to their first real use. Near certain isn't completely certain, Tuovilus. Tell me the evidence you've got first before I make a decision and before we bring this to Mother. She will not have any mercy for wasting her time. The human weapon Tarath used against you is a keystone item. He said, triggering the occult fractal deep inside him. Fractal power pulsed and Tuovilus faded slightly, turning more into a ghost. A cross-dimensional leap, only halted at a very specific point. A similar ability he had found among Tuekar's own suite. He was loath to commit several of his hardpoints to any ability, not without being certain it would become his standard of fighting. But he had been in operation for near a decade now, most feathers already had a full suite of fractals by now. Decision paralysis. The chronic vulnerability of an overthinker. In a way, having the choice taken away from him had been a blessing. He needed this ability to search the might sea. And he needed what was left behind deep inside the sea. Against an enemy feather, he needed a weapon that had been used to kill feathers. You know the source of that weapon she used against me? Suffocate asked. That log I sent you is the first recorded use of that weapon, by a human against Tuekar. The very same human that Darath's logs showed skewered by her sword. He said, taking a few steps forward, translucent. The sea made no motion, the shapes looming in the distance remained waiting. Hardly any evidence. My cute little sister killed the human like she had been tasked to do and took his weapon as a trophy. We saw the footage ourselves. That doesn't seem to be much of a conspiracy against Mother. Paranoia is not a good look on you, you're far too young to lose your head already. Suffocate huffed. That would have been the case. Except while diving into the archive to recover the information on the proto-feathers, I was intercepted by 2 human knights. Intercepted in the digital sea? Impossible. Humans can't digitize like that. They're meat. They can't connect to the digital sea. Tuovilus didn't answer that, instead sending over the data package of his experience. The armors worn by both knights. One matches the same human that nearly destroyed Tuekar. The one that was supposed to be dead. Darath doctored the footage somehow to make it seem as if she'd killed the human. She didn't take his weapon. The human created or lent her his. Your recording might have been some rogue program using their image to spook you. She said, although he could tell in her voice she wasn't quite convinced. Too much coincidence. And no program should have known he'd been tasked with investigating. Tuovilus remained quiet, letting his teammate mull over the chances of that. All logical thought returned back to Darath having some kind of working relationship with these humans. Tuovilus didn't need to say a word. With a final step forward, he walked out into the sea, the cubes passing through him, harmless now that the occult kept him slightly out of reality. The power remained stable, keeping him immune to the crushing cubes that roiled around him. We need to warn Mother. Suffocate finally said, defeated. Even if we are not completely certain yet, you're right that there's far too much that fits your conclusion. She'll need to know that it's at least possible. She already knows. Tuovilus said through the data link. Consider it. Darath was built like the original proto-feathers, intentionally. And then Mother attached a second-generation feather as her mentor. An assassin built to kill feathers. Already primed to search for any hint of betrayal. I see only one logical reason for this. I see. She thought he'd keep her in line, or deal with her before she betrayed Mother. Suffocate concluded. As far as Tuovilus understood Mother's true plan, he believed she had attempted to recreate the same success she had with abdication. A second A57, loyal to her. Her old champion had been destroyed against the humans long ago, or so went the general tale, and she hadn't found another champion to elevate since. Her project clearly failed, and now they had to clean up. Further into the depth he went, trusting his instruments to guide the way. Scanning through, searching for evidence. He hit the seabed, vision completely obscured by the cubes, no light reaching here. In the murk, the real work began. There is one additional factor. Us. Us? Including me in your plans for once? How sweet of you. Tuekar was a veteran feather specifically made to kill feathers, he could have easily cut all 3 of us to pieces. And he lost. Were it me, I would have dispatched several second-generation feathers to eliminate Darath. Instead, she sent us, and worse, assigned me as the leader. Why send what is effectively cannon fodder? I'm pleased you think so highly of Tuorda and I. Suffocate said, unamused. Tuovilus said nothing, waiting for an answer. His own track record was clear, and he held no illusions on how that reflected on himself, given the number of retreats he'd committed. Fine. If you ask me, this must be a test for you. Suffocate said. Perhaps Mother is attempting to give you a second chance to prove yourself. Mother was cruel, that he already knew. It would be like her to send him and his 2 subordinates unsuspectedly into the jaws of an enemy she had no hope he could win against. Suffocate and Tuorda would both be rebuilt without issue. Him on the other hand? That would be different. That's why he had to fight unlike all other feathers. He couldn't afford to fail even once. He doubled his efforts, continuing his search at the bottom of the Might Sea, keeping a careful watch on his resources. Nothing so far. I believe she is hedging her bets. Tuovilus said, keeping his inner thoughts to himself. Mother is sending us first as expendable soldiers to test Taratha's true abilities in full. Trading our shells for information, so that her second team of feathers will eliminate Taratha with no damage. We're cheaper to replace than more powerful feathers. Ironic in a way, as he'd done the same to Tisefit when ordering her to investigate Taratha. He had only suspicions then, hunches. They'd proven true, as always. My, what an accusation. Suppose we're there to deal the opening punch then. Better get this over with fast, we should be getting to Orda and marching back to deal with our misbehaving little sister, we'll go directly to that city of hers first thing. Perhaps we might surprise Mother and take her head ourselves. I told you before. I don't fight threats that could kill me without research and a plan. And she won't be in that city either. I nearly eradicated her and I see no sign of her anywhere in the sea, she must be back at her city, licking her wounds. Not destroying that city of hers first before she's back on her feet is a mistake. Regardless of your thoughts, I have been given command of this team. Tuovilus said. He couldn't lose control of these two feathers. They were the expendable ones, and his strongest units. Taratha needs to be handled with care. Please, she won by chance and surprise. Tisefit scoffed. And now she's only got chance left. Against 3 of us? Not even that. You underestimate her resources. Taratha alone could not have killed Tuekar. She must have had help from the humans. And I do not know what that help has resource-wise. Humans? We can bring lessers to handle the insects. Why bother factoring them in? They're only humans. I'm not here to take chances. You will obey my orders, even if you do not agree with them. Fine, oh magnificent leader. I'll do my best to be scared of the little scurrying humans hiding behind their walls. Arrogance. Tuovilus thought. Arrogance born from those who didn't need to care about living through a fight. Those same humans nearly destroyed Tuekar alone. I am not going to repeat someone else's mistakes, and neither will you. And your great plan, oh wise leader. Tuekar misrecognized the human chain weapon when he first saw it, and he feared it. He claimed it had been thrown into the Might Sea. I narrowed down the most likely location to here. So you are looking for the dead corpse of a fallen feather, to loot their weapon. My, how appropriate coming from you. Tisefit said, a smile in her voice. Assuming you even have the right section of the sea here, his shell and fabled weapon must be gone for good. Nothing sinks without getting crushed into pieces first, as you know. Appearances may be deceiving. My instincts tell me there is more to this. In effect, he had gambled everything on those feelings. They'd led him correctly so far. Did the mites really let A12's dead shell get crushed into pieces? If so, he should find scraps of it at the bottom. Thus far, he only found crushed sand and metal parts that matched second-generation feathers. The material composition was well documented in the archives, as alloys were improved over time. He knew that the original proto-feathers were built differently than their mass-manufactured counterparts. The proto-feathers had the favor of the mites during their rebellion, that part had been clear. If they had not crushed his shell, there was a chance his body was still intact and hidden under here. The mites were known to be creatures of habit, often marking places as sanctuaries to remain undisturbed. Moved around, yet untouched by future colonies. Part of their original task, to contain and protect dangerous waste material. Even after all this time of mutation, some part of their original task must remain buried in their collective minds. They were hoarders, always looking to preserve history in some way. And if this proto-feather grave of yours exists, why here? The other strata moved over time, mite colonies changing or pushing the landscape every few decades as they passed by. But the Might Sea was different. This entire strata was nearly untouched by mite terraforming colonies. There are only 2 battlefields within this strata from that time period that have their records sealed off. I do not know what happened, the terms of engagement, nor the forces. Only that something happened here. And if it had been this redacted, it could only mean one thing. And evidence of broken second-generation parts had only confirmed his original assumptions. He had 1 in 2 chances of being correct. It took hours of wandering blindly around until he stumbled upon something different. A hollow section deep within the Might Sea. He stepped through the moving cubes and found a set of them completely frozen, acting as a wall. Crossing the wall, a massive trapped bubble of air waited on the other side. A cavern within the might see. Relaxing his occult power, the feather rematerialized inside the empty space. The cavern stretched far, twisting and turning at many angles to form the layout of a flower petal. All leading to a center room, brightly lit and filled with a reflective shallow lake. An inch of crystal clear water, undisturbed for years, looking almost invisible except for the few sparkles of reflected light, acting more as an unbroken half-mirror of the ceiling. Above, twinkling lights like stars spread across, providing illumination, the space in between too dark to make out against the white dots, giving the cavern a feeling of eternity. The floor slowly raised the closer to the center of the chamber it went, eventually surpassing the shallow lake, turning into a small patch of dry land. Here, Tuovilas found what he had been searching for. An unmoving silhouette, eternally meditating upon a dais, legs crossed. A shawl of unremarkable tan covered its features, designs long faded away. Behind it, a massive pillar watched over, illuminated water flowing from both sides, brightly lit. The proto-feather. A12. The feather paused, scanning the area for possible traps. Signals sent out, sounding waves, electroscopic data retrieval, infrared pings. Everything he had in his suite. Nothing. The chamber was wall, water and pseudo-stars of the ceiling. The pillar, only a set piece. A small ring of water surrounded the dais, separate from the lake, churning water flowing from the fountain behind, dimly glowing blue from lights secreted under. He hesitated despite all systems showing green. There was a creeping sense of instinctive fear climbing up his spine. This place was not one he was welcome in. The stillness felt almost oppressive. He began to walk from the edge of the room to the center point, across the lake. Waves raced away from his footfalls with nothing else to compete against. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his senses on high alert. His steps were the only sound in the chamber besides the flowing waterfalls from the pillar at the center, and his ultimate target. Differences between his own shell and the proto-feather were stark. It lacked the grace and organic curves of his own shell, looking far more angular with lines and cuts. Far less human-like and more machine. For a moment, Tuovilas believed that the proto-feather was waiting on standby. Further cautious steps forward showed the truth, especially after his scans returned. The old feather's body was shattered, held together by bits of cubes fused together under the ripped robes, as if a child had stuffed a broken porcelain doll with clumpy wet sand in an attempt to restore the basic look. Large swaths of his body were outright missing, completely made up of the cube stuffing, where the mites attempted their best to recreate the true shape that had once been. Most of the head had been replaced by cubes as well, melding into the feather's porcelain face. What was left of it? It looked as if a geometric cancer had ravished the body. A macabre sight. A12 did not stir as his grave robber slowly approached. The shell remained seated in a lotus position, slightly hunched over, a monk frozen in trance. No, the proto-feather was dead. Long dead. This chamber was nothing more than a tomb, built by the mites as a form of homage. He spoke over the link. I have found the proto-feather's shell. Static for a moment, but a data package was received in mostly good shape. You're awfully cavalier about all this. Shouldn't you be more respectful in this sort of location? That is one of our great forefathers after all, willful traitor or not. I don't see the point. He said, continuing forward across the lake, directly at his target. His scans had found no traps, and further time spent would not reveal more. Superstition is not befitting of a feather. He supposed other feathers may have stopped or felt afraid of a location like this. But Tuovilas put his priorities first. The feather before him was dead and gone. And he needed to avoid that fate. The intrusion in the archives had been a wake-up call that his enemies would not be the standard deathless. Scans showed a small rectangular stone, recessed in the ground right by the foot of the dead proto-feather. With little difficulty, his hand lifted the slab off, tossing it away. A large chain was neatly folded inside, coiled like a snake. Just as Tuekar had described it. Looks like your intuition paid off. Tsefit said. The weapon's handle was ornate, a work of art with angular straight lines. As if cutting through wind. Each link on the chain had written words in fine print. Names of feathers, Tuovilas realized. Some written more than once. A quick scan showed 427 names. Tuekar's name appeared 14 times. No wonder the feather had felt panic on seeing something similar. He reached a hand out to lift the weapon from its grave. Lights flashed on the sides the moment his hand wrapped around the hilt, the chain waking from slumber as if groggy and mildly confused. Tuovilus was not one for sentimentality, but there was something about this ancient weapon that had his hackles on edge, as if it would just as easily destroy him as it would his enemies. It was clearly far too heavy for any human to use. Which made sense, A12 was not a human. There was no trigger nor activation switch. Instead, Tuovilus found only an I/O port embedded within the hilt. With little choice, he connected a wire from his palm and prepared his systems for possible cyber warfare. Firewalls and a few dozen virtual warfare suites booted up within his systems. He verified their integrity 3 times, isolating himself into a sandbox instance before he opened the port. Nothing came from the weapon besides a simple connection request, blocking him from accessing the rest of the chain's abilities. A set of 12 cryptographic keys were needed. He would need to obtain the instructions directly from the source. One hand drew up to the broken shell before him, linking a wire into the first functional port he could find at the neckline. Most had been destroyed or disconnected, but one seemed to still work. He didn't expect to find the keys to the weapon within the corpse. If the proto-feathers were anywhere near as intelligent as he'd read up, they would have already taken standard steps against enemy tampering. There still might be data to recover that could assist him further in how to use the weapon, and he'd need it. Proto-feathers were far more than their weapons. "My little brother, acting a little reckless now, are we?" His sister called out, watching the feed through his eyes. "What if you wake him up? I can't exactly come down there to bail you out, and even Tuorda can't save you either, his abilities have limits, you know. Not that it would help even if he could reach you. If this really is a sleeping monster, don't be surprised when you find yourself stuck in his teeth as a starting snack. So long as I am careful and in control, I can prevent mishaps," he said, more to himself than to his sister. If the proto-feather was functional enough to return to life with just his light prodding, it would have already done so. It had centuries to repair itself back to full health in this hidden tomb. A12 had not. That was meaningful enough to draw a conclusion. Connection established, power flowed from Tuovilus into A12's broken systems. Blue light flickered and grew within the slumped shell. Tuovilus could sense the internals respond. Requests from different partitions arrived and he carefully filtered through each, taking a tentative beachhead within the broken systems. There was no resistance. First he had to confirm why the feather had not been able to restore itself automatically. Just to be sure that he would not trigger something dormant. Integrity reports almost failed to load, all key measuring systems broken beyond repair. That was promising. What little backup systems did function showed deep red. All fractals within the central chest plate had been destroyed, including the soul fractal, which had 4 massive holes punched through. Tuovilus sent a connection to the machine archives and ran the fractals through, curious to see what kit this feather ran. No results returned for any of the fractals. The proto-feather must have discovered new fractals outside of what Mother knew about, and brought it to the grave with him. The soul fractal itself did not match the standard template. Instead, it looked mutated, only vaguely similar to the one he'd been familiar with. A new soul fractal? It lacked the unity fractal as well. He supposed that could be a possibility. Fractals were infinite. The study of fractals was more a study of statistics. Recreating this fractal was impossible with the holes punched through. However, knowledge could always be leveraged in the future. Tuovilus shut off his connection to the machine archives, no longer needing them. Mother always made sure no feathers could hold a copy of those, lest one of their kind be defeated and hacked into Baitsuya, unveiling her strongest assets. Security he had no wish to poke at, given his current rating among her servants. A pity those fractals had been destroyed. And while Tuovilus could search through the broken memory banks left behind, he was certain even if A12's memory nodes were fully restored, those fractals would not have been saved at all, following the same security Mother used. Specifically to prevent situations exactly like this. Nanoswarm command nodes within the broken proto-feather had all been destroyed with pinpoint accuracy as well, likely a priority target. Self-healing was out of commission. But the mites could have opted to repair him, given how far they'd gone for all this. Which meant enough of A12's systems must have been destroyed to the point physical restoration would restore a factory default rather than the original feather. A new soul would have crystallized instead. He opened power gates into the upper systems, restarting the base core of the feather and watching carefully for what he'd find. Some of A12's neuromorphic mind remained functional as expected. Not enough to generate any meaningful data, or reboot the systems without Tuovilus's own assistance providing the majority of the power and computation, at which point the rebooted systems would be more an extension of him than anything else. But there were enough pieces left to store fragmented data of the proto-feather's past. Memories slept within the dead body, floating in the darkness eternal. The new feather took them all in, churning out a few dedicated threads to attempt to stitch the data together, predicting what the missing pieces could be with the context clues and restoring it within a threshold of 90% accuracy. Half-remembered memories of combat. Things that the proto-feather had buried away. Those he copied over, finding many of the files possibly helpful, if their new coordinates after all these centuries could be found. Seems even the proto-feathers had enemies they could not completely destroy, and had to seal away instead. Next, he searched for remaining combat systems, turning on what he could find in order to duplicate them, constantly keeping vigilant with each new subsystem reactivated. They responded, lighting up, showing him detailed information in green. Of all hardware a feather would want to make sure remains in working condition, it would be those. Customized suites, generated and honed by the proto-feather over time. Hundreds of variations remained stable, the nodes all backed up 36 times throughout the body. A12 had done a thorough job, making so many redundant backups that they had outlived even his own complete destruction. Tuovilus could respect that kind of foresight. Whoever the proto-feather had been, his shell had been shaped and prepared for war, to fight to the very last possible second, and even theoretically past that point. This was also what nearly killed Tuovilus. He couldn't notice the system slowly crafting rogue connections autonomously, deep under the layers of data. The growing mass of threads sneaking to the ruined remains of the neuromorphic mind, following pre-constructed connections hidden deep within the software, attempting to re-establish a link. One last failsafe, impossible to spot from individual nodes, only appearing once enough systems had been activated. The dead feather's eyes flew open, deep glowing blue staring at Tuovilus from the grave. He kicked his systems into overdrive a moment too late. The hand of a dead wraith jabbed forward, dozens of cubes breaking into fine powder as the metal skeleton under it all moved. Intrusion countermeasure systems flashed active. Too late to catch the command blocker sent by the dead feather. Shields failed to materialize as the virus took a few microseconds to completely purge out of his system. During that tiny window of time, nails effortlessly cut through Tuovilus's unshielded chest plate, the fingers aimed straight for his soul fractal. Reaction speed and the armor he'd worn saved his life. Tuovilus shifted his shoulders, forcing the fingers to cut through more armor to reach his core, slowing down the attack by an extra fraction of time. At the same moment, his free hand shot out, grasping the dead feather's wrist and stopping it in place. There was no emotion on the dead face, but Tuovilus felt as if the remaining bits of the dead proto-feather were mildly annoyed that its attempt to kill had been foiled. That had been close. Very close. There were lessons to learn from this, he thought, squeezing the old feather's hand and crushing the internal components easily. It had been fast, but not fast enough. The proto-feather's shell was long obsolete compared to his own. Not to mention the structural integrity of the arm was already barely holding together. If the proto-feather's fingers hadn't already been weapons designed for jabs like this, they would have broken against his chest plate armor. As it was, the thicker armor slowed the hand as it went through, just enough. Other feathers hated armor, considering it an insult to the ability of their current shell. Tuovilus didn't care, replacing his torso and body with the far more bulky armor in order to fit in slightly more shields. The only vanity Tuovilus allowed was a set of reading glasses, a personal harmless call sign. Satisfied that the proto-feather wasn't going to attempt to turn this room into a second tomb, he downloaded everything he could from those rebellious systems, placing it all carefully under quarantine and safely locked away in case the proto-feather had left behind more traps. With the systems reconnected to the neuromorphic mind, the full array had been active and within reach. He hastily cut the connections with swift and merciless strikes through the digital codes, the half-working combat systems giving hardly any resistance without a central command to organize the defense. The hand went limp. From there, he disconnected himself from the body, watching as the proto-feather's internal lights faded away, returning to the silent vigil of death. He had a 12S weapon and the combat data he needed to use it. The codes protecting it would only last for so long before he broke the encryption. With this, he had the tools to deal with Tarath and her human accomplices. It was true that Tuovilus rarely won. Almost all skirmishes in his records showed nearly constant retreats. Fights that should have been resolved within a single bout lasted dozens, spanning hours or even days until his target was eliminated. He really was considered the weakest feather by objective metrics. A coward in Mother's eyes. What Mother failed to understand about him is that when the dust finally settled, he was the one who remained standing. Every single time this task she'd sent him on would be no different. Book 4, Chapter 20, Resolution. Captain Sagrius stood at attention, all 4 Winterscar knights behind him. They'd arrived first after we sent out meet-up coordinates, escorting Kedra, who brought with her a backpack that looked more like a large sack to abduct people. Which was kind of the point, given that the 2 of us were planning on using it exactly for that reason, stuffing Wrath in a sack. She tossed it on the ground, wasting no time opening up the string. I eyed the sack. Could have picked a better color, this clashes with my theme, you know. And is she really going to fit in there? Looks a little on the small side. Dear brother. My extremely kind and generous older sister said, I had to get this at the last possible second, all while organizing the house knights to recover all your workshop equipment, in the middle of a city-wide call to evacuate. If you say another word, I'm afraid there may be violence. She turned her head to the Winterscar knights behind her. And would you look at this, there doesn't seem to be any witnesses. The knights behind her had an unusual amount of additional equipment in addition to the rifles and ammunition carried on the hover sleds behind them. They also shared a quick look between each other, before nodding solemnly to the Winterscar Prime. Bunch of traitors, can't ever get good minions these days. And speaking of the devils, Captain Sagrius stepped forward before me with a curt salute, then waved over the equipment the knights had recovered from my workshop before leaving. The list was depressingly short. I notice most of my gear and trinkets are missing. I said, a sinking feeling in my gut. They didn't fall off on the way, did they? My lord, we could only carry the complete prototypes with us. The good captain said. Your experimental items had to be left behind, and standard operational doctrine demanded that we destroy anything left behind. No hiding location was deemed secure enough for these relics. Lady Winterscar's clothing items are of lower priority and could be left behind for future recovery. I gave the captain a nod, knowing it was all for the ultimate best in the end, and turned to complain about it to Kedra. When did hiding things under the bed no longer make the cut in security? Nobody told me about this change. I'm lodging a formal complaint the moment we're back on solid snow. Swear to the gods. The House Prime is going to hear about all this. Objections noted, and will be put under careful review. Kedra said, rolling her eyes. Shaking my head at the injustice of the world, I brought Wrath's cradled shell over to the sack and started to consider the logistics here. It was probably large enough to fit her up to her head, so long as we rolled her up into a ball. We'd just gotten started on stuffing the Undercity's de facto supreme royal monarch into the sack when the original 20 clan knights following Atius arrived from different directions, all within minutes of each other. They were very professional and didn't ask any weird questions like, what the 3 gods are you doing with that girl? And we didn't need to tell them excuses like, it's not what it looks like. Well, kind of, but there's nuance. Windrunner walked up to Lord Atius's side, technically second in command now that the whole army had assembled, and then gave us a pointed look. Likely expecting an explanation for all this, because I admit first impressions don't make us look like the good guys. Lord Atius followed behind with weary steps. We'll wait for the Shadow Song's whelps to arrive and then I'll brief you all. No doubt you are all confused at the mass evacuation orders that were sent into the city a moment ago. Windrunner nodded. Sir. Given the orders, I assume we've been made. In a manner of speaking. Atius said, turning to the gathered group. 7 to 10 knights was the standard for an underground expedition. We had gone way over that number. This many clan knights all gathered together in one spot? There's only one reason, and it's shortly before a full-on war against another clan or an other-sider encampment. It gave an ominous feeling. And maybe the pair of Winterscars working hard on stuffing a girl into a slightly too small sack in the background might have added to it. Can't really tell, since I spent the time mostly hissing at my sister for bringing a Kevlar sack. Wrath's wing feathers were god's damned pointy. And the broken sections constantly got caught in the material. I needed something resistant, and I couldn't find a strong enough metal box correctly sized with back straps in time. Kedra hissed back. I had 5 minutes to find this and go. You try to do this feat in that short amount of time in the middle of complete chaos. In the process of shoving Wrath into the sack, a few metal feathers were bent. Wrath did not appreciate this. Please desist from causing my shell further damage. This will increase the repair time needed. Wrath said over the soul bridge between us, using Journey's external speakers, with its permission. Her violet eyes were the only thing we'd managed to get working after I'd tried to manually reboot some parts of her system while we'd been waiting. Mild success. hoping for more, but there's a limit to what I could do, even with relic armor gloves keeping my hands steady. Optical systems were a good first step, not too integrated into all the tiny bits in her head. Maybe if I had more time I could fix up some of the damaged wiring inside her shell. Feathers were built with far too many redundant systems. All I needed was to pick the least damaged one and make sure at least one thing was connected. Even her soul fractal seemed to be connected to adaptive circuitry. If I had enough time, I might even be able to hook up her arms and legs to root through those. She wouldn't be able to use them with any finesse as she told me, and walking was out of the question, but it was possible for her to try to move them manually. The real killing issue here was that heat damage was extra effective. It hit everything at about the same rate. So while all those redundant features made Feathers excellent at shrugging off pinpoint strikes, area of effect hits did a number on them. Most of her body I could probably fix up into working condition so long as she directed me. None of those would fix the small circuitry inside her head that let her use all of this with any kind of skill. This is your fault for making your wingtips pointy. Kedra shot back at our captive. Even shut down and unmoving, I'm amazed you're still capable of making life miserable for all of us. Keith taught you too much. My wings fit particular aesthetics. It was necessary for them to be pointy. She said, completely serious. Given she was a feather, I actually believed she really meant every word of that. Kedra did too, one hand snatching Wrath's cheek and pinching it up and down. All of this will be fixed up at the Might Forge, yes? What does it matter if I bend and break a few more fingers? That's a steep upgrade from Feathertips. You seem a little miffed, I remarked, gleefully adding more fuel into the fire. I had some excellent patterns and colors I intended to bring back to the surface. Now, it's unlikely I'll get those back until the later expedition to loot the city, she said, giving Wrath a particularly hard shove into the sack. Violet eyes glared back at her in response. You are planning to loot my city, she said, angry about all the wrong things in this picture. Kedra turned her helmet in my direction. Why is she even active? I thought you mentioned she was unconscious in the message. She's afraid of the dark, I said with a shrug. I am not afraid of the dark, Wrath said, violet eyes indigent. She couldn't move any of her facial features yet. But despite the neutral look, I could tell she'd be glaring at me if she could. Besides, this is not the dark, I simply lose consciousness. There is a debatable difference. I turned up to Kedra. Like I said, she's afraid of the dark and wants me to hold her hand. It's a little adorable. Also, I think we need to restart, maybe if we tried rolling her up outside the sack first. I pointed at part of a tangle starting to happen. A feather is not afraid of the dark, Wrath said while Kedra lifted her out. My sister gave me a pointed look. Fine, I huffed. I'll be serious. Her soul fractal is active so long as a soul tendril connects. It looks like without her shell working, artificial souls fade. I don't know if it's permanent or just temporary. We know she can last at least an hour while in that deep sleep, since that's how long it took us to get to her. Maybe contact with another living being is enough to keep the concept of herself alive. After a bit of begging from her, I decided to be magnanimous and keep her company. Wrath seethed. That is factually incorrect and you know it, human. Fine, let me rephrase that. After a bit of dignified begging from her, I'd slander. She interrupted, glaring at me. Feathers do not beg. My sister turned her gaze in my direction. Perhaps we are being a little too rough, she has lost almost all of her body and is currently being shoved into a sack. Counterpoint, we are Winterscars, I said, raising a finger. Kedra hummed and nodded. Fair point, continue. Right. Now as I was saying, a terrifying machine of mass destruction is clearly not scared of the dark. And it would be ridiculous of me to insinuate that, of course. She just appreciates that I'm holding her hand like this through a tough time. Exactly. Wrath said as we got her feet into the sack and brought her head back out. I had to hold her by the armpits and lift her up so that we could properly aim her down. We do not know the full effects of leaving an artificial soul disconnected from a neural network for extended periods of time. Keeping me awake and aware is the preferred course of action. I understand, Kedra said, turning again to me as we lowered her into the sack. Congratulations, dear brother, it seems we've successfully abducted a stray. You okay with us bringing her back into our house? I said. I know you've had some history with her. The stabbing kind. So long as she doesn't have fleas, I'm sure she'll fit in with the house. With some of the fabrics I'll loot from her city, I may even sew her a nice dress. Perhaps a uniform. Black and white, with frills and a tiara. Very traditional. Fitting end for what she put me through. Violet eyes stared daggers back at Kidra, but Wrath smartly decided to remain close-lipped at the provocation of having her city looted in any way. Capranor will be an empty ghost town within a day, and quite a lot of resources are being left behind. Kidra continued, baiting the silent feather lurking in the sack. Resources the clan could use. Once the other side hears of the evacuation, they'll come searching to pick the city's bones regardless. I don't intend to let them have first take. That finally got her. That is my city you intend to loot, I won it by conquest. It's mine. The equipment, gear, people, and food are all mine by right. Kidra, I think we made a mistake. I said, wagging a finger within biting distance at the half-filled sack with violet eyes glowing inside, staring angrily back at me. Look at how greedy she is about her loot. Typical spider behavior rather than a stray cat, if my machine guide is correct. I've learned only some lessons on handling machines. Kidra said, bringing one of Wrath's feathers up for inspection. How much force do you believe would be required to snap one of these? This seems like important information to know, we should run a few experiments. While they weren't connected to anything, there was still a magnetic field of some kind that was active and making them resistant to being bullied around. All part of regular feathers' stupid amounts of independent systems, all built to continue functioning even in the face of extreme damage. The spider in question sputtered a few half-thought-out words, before pausing. A slow blink in the darkness of the sack. I admit your analysis is correct that it would make more sense to loot my city on a return trip in the future. She spat out the word loot as if she'd been forced by gunpoint to cooperate. Which wasn't too far from the truth. And? Kidra asked, tapping another obstructing wingtip. And I am allowing my older nature to resurface. Slightly. Wrath said, sulking further into her soul fractal, glowing eyes looking away. I know you worked hard on your textiles, Kidra, I regret that they weren't deemed critical enough to bring with you. If I had bought the city a few more days, you would have been able to carry those to your residence. Kidra stopped, gauntlet looking like it was about to bend another pointy bit. It matters not. I'll be sure to recover them on a second expedition, another time. She folded the metal feather more gently, pushing it into the broken wing in the right place. Besides, the majority of the textiles I wanted, I've already incorporated into my armor. My sister had added a few touches on the otherwise barren and unpainted look of the Winterscar armor that father had kept clean and uncluttered for the past lifetime. Relic armor could easily tear away cloth as if it were a sheet of window ice, so it didn't matter too much what she added or if it could get caught in anything. Against moving 400-pound metal, few things would hold it back. She wasn't exactly wearing a typical kimono, but the armor looked about as close to that as possible, with parts of the cloth cleverly cut to look as if it were all under the plate. It looks, father said, and then wisely stopped midway. Never mind. I meant nothing of note. Being a stout traditionalist, father had never adorned the armor with any kind of trinkets beyond the sigils of the house. Kidra did not care to continue that legacy. She slowly looked down at the necklace she wore, as if daring the old ghost to make another comment. Go on. She said, voice sounding awfully sweet. Do remember, I quite liked the lacy patterns with Winterscar blood red. I could return to the city to fetch it. It is, after all, my armor now. I can do as I wish with it. That's a trap. I said, warning father while I shifted Wrath inside the sack to bring her head out as a last step. Do as you like. It's no longer my concern. Father tutted, turning back to his meditation. He understood Kidra and I had absolutely no reservations on working together. We could be at each other's throats 1 second, before immediately barking down a newcomer with no pause. He was fair game like Wrath, since both of them couldn't lift a finger to stop us now. He didn't need to say more. Enka and the Shadow Song minions appeared, holding a standard sprint as they covered ground. They'd even brought all their collected weapons, and a hover sled behind them with more ammunition and rations. In moments, they reached our little gathering spot and took position in the lineup. We'd finally gotten all of Wrath's body correctly stuffed snugly into the sack, with half her head poking out. Knees raised to her chest and arms hugging her sides, with the wing parts all safe from cutting the Kevlar. Journey had no trouble lifting the sack into position while Kidra tightened the straps to keep the sack hands free. She gave the feather a pat on the head when it was all done. Lord Atius took a step forward, and the knights all turned attention to him. Expedition Team, mission briefing is as follows. Approximately 2 hours prior, an enemy feather approached the city attempting to gather intel on Tuekar's defeat and location. Lady Tarath departed in an attempt to stall. Negotiations broke down, and the only option was to engage in a friendly spar with the feather, aiming to destroy her. This worked with mixed results. During the fight with this feather, Lady Tarath sustained fatal damage to her systems and is currently mostly offline. Fortunately, she was able to eliminate the opposing feather, granting the Undersiders a stay of execution. That feather will be back, and the amount of time the city has before the machines discover their true allegiance is likely measured in hours now, hence the immediate evacuation orders. Behind the group, I could see the twinkling city lights of the pillar. A massive snake of lights were moving out of the gatehouse, spreading into thinner lines the further along the path they went. The city had steadily been evacuating over the past week, with enormous groups leaving every other hour. I thought those were large crowds. This made it all look like tiny expeditions in comparison. Most would have to journey on foot, with a few soldiers to serve as guards. Transports were all taken up, or still returning back from the last deposit. Our knights had to really fight to bring the few hover sleds we had, packed with provisions. It would be arduous for the people leaving, the voyage lasting days if not weeks of traveling through unclaimed territory. General Zhang was busy securing important items and projects for his own personal convoy, such as Tuekar's broken shell that his war scientists were still slowly studying. The machines in the city would be filtering out later, rejoining and hiding among the larger ranks. Perhaps their shared experience would curb the bloodthirsty monsters that lay past the sectors Tarath had controlled. Lord Atius watched with the rest of us at the distant parade. Old eyes grew hard. What comes next does not involve the clan. And I do not speak as the clan lord, only as a deathless. We need Tarath back online. However, the damage Tarath sustained is too delicate for conventional repairs. And given her status as a machine trader, it is very likely that this may be the last time a Might Forge is left unguarded as the machines sound the alarm and begin to hunt after her. I aim to escort Keith to the nearest one, where he'll assist in the recovery. Once minimum repairs are complete, we will depart straight for the surface rendezvous point. As the first known feather to turn against the machines, she may play a critical part to stabilizing some kind of peace underground. One thing I need to make clear, this is not the clan's business. As far as our home expects of us, we should return to the surface to help against the invasion, not run headfirst against a machine army. The clan is my home, my people. But deathless are called to do more. I am compelled to see this through. No murmurs among the group. The knights all stood ramrod straight, watching the clan lord, waiting. They knew he wasn't done yet. Those of you who serve the clan first, I will understand if your choice is to return now. I'll give an oath upon my name that I shall not hold your decision against you once I return to the clan. The next pickup at the rendezvous location is in 5 days, if you go now at full sprint, you should reach the evac zone with a day to spare for the unexpected. The clan lord turned to scan the rest of the knights, age and wisdom in his gaze. I have a good idea of who can come and who cannot. If you cannot, you know who you are. Go in peace. You've honored your vow by coming down here in the first place, and more even by staying and helping the Undersiders in their time of need. More isn't expected from any of you. His head turned to stare down one knight in particular, giving him a slow nod. The knight stared back, then saluted and took a step backwards. Forgive me, Lord. I have too much at stake, my fam. Atius raised a hand, pausing the knight's speech. Targan, lad, I know you and your situation back home. You have nothing to apologize for. Shelby needs you with that little hellion of yours. This mission is optional, unlike ending Tuekar's threat to the clan. A call to action, not duty. 4 knights shuffled their feet, glanced at each other, and took a step back out of the line, joining the first knight. 3 others followed shortly after. All 5 Winterscar knights stood their ground, helmets locked on me. I had a feeling they were going wherever I was, and nobody could tell them otherwise. Oddly enough, Anka and her minions remained in the lineup, arms crossed over their chest as if this whole thing was beneath their notice. Atius glanced in her direction, raising an eyebrow, saying nothing otherwise. It looked like there was nobody else leaving the lineup. 13 of the clan knights remained, with 7 having backed out. Atius raised a hand, calling attention again. There is more. You all need to know the dangers that are waiting for us. Else your decision isn't informed. If danger appears, it is likely to be far worse than a standard expedition. Expected enemies are any of the known machine variants, and possibly 3 feathers if we're not fast enough to get to this forge before the machines discover the deception. 2 are of unknown abilities and 1 with semi-revealed ones. Sending the info package on what we know of to Suffocate now. There was a heavy tilt in his voice on this as all our HUD received the info package, opening it up to detailed specs we'd learned from talking to Wrath. Normally, it takes a team of deathless working together to wear 1 down a single feather. Against 3, with access to an army, if the worst comes to happen it will be a difficult fight at best, even with our equipment and abilities. A group of feathers working together aren't uncommon on the lower strata, rather they're infamous. They're sent when deathless get too far deep into the machine world and the machines want them stopped. Lads, I'll be straight with you all, I haven't heard of a deathless team that survived past that point. It's typically known as the end of any expedition when feathers are mobilized as a group. The goal at that point is to hold off the feathers while any mortals among the expedition attempt to escape. The group of knights didn't stir nor question anything. Atius nodded, as if expecting this from his elites. That said, there hasn't been a deathless team composed of more than 10, we're too spread out from one another to gather like this. Usual teams are 3 to 4, typically with support of Imperial Crusaders. Right now there are 19 of us assembled here. All of you have access to equipment and techniques that put you on par with a deathless, or even above them depending on your skills and experience. The raw firepower this expedition has far outstrips even a full legion of Imperials. The challenge isn't insurmountable. This is likely the first time in centuries that a group of feathers is under threat of being beaten. It is, however, almost assuredly going to be deadly, which is one thing deathless have on mortals. We can go in again and again, undying. You only have 1 life to give. We were glass cannons in this case. Capable of dealing more damage than deathless, but not capable of taking the same hits. The songs of a band of heroes diving into the heart of the enemy and returning all unscathed are just that, songs. Reality is harsh and rarely forgiving. We came down here to hunt down and kill a single wounded feather, equipped with twice the number expected to ensure we won. It was necessary, and we'd brought as much as we could to mitigate the risks. Now, things have changed. All of you need to turn and ask your mirror, is your death something your house can afford? The safe route is still there, waiting behind you. At that, he turned knowing eyes to the shadow songs. They remained in the lineup, stubborn. Up until one other clan knight had his shoulders slumped down, and took a step back. Windrunner, standing next to Lord Atius, was giving a death stare at one of the knights that was still among the lineup. That knight looked as if he was being raked over the coals. Likely a private comms chat between the two. A moment later, the knight gave a small nod, and took a step back. Shadow Song. Atius said, eyes still focused on the trio. All the knights assembled here are among the elite warriors of our clan. Veterans, one and all. They've spent years training in armor. You 3 have only gained armor recently. While I have no doubt that you possess the courage to come with us, you lack the experience yet. Go live to fight another day. Anka and her minions still stood their ground, with the spoiled princess outright glaring back at the clan lord. When the city was under siege by that feather, Kedra shared the winter blossom technique with us all. She has the same experience and time with her armor as we have. We can, and will, match her blade. House Shadowsong will not suffer to be cowed or judged a lesser. Lass, consider that wisely. Pride often finds itself misplaced, more so in youth. Your father wouldn't handle news of your death well. If you go with the retreating knights here, it's guaranteed you'll return safe to the surface. I said what I said, it is unbecoming of a Shadowsong to withdraw words spoken. I am a full member of the clan, with all the rights that attend to that rank, including independence. Anka said, turning her helmet to stare at Kedra for a moment. Should I die in this mission of yours, then record these words to my father, I upheld the honor of our noble house. I am no craven coward hiding behind the shadows of others. Atius leveled his stare and held it for a moment. Anka didn't back down. So be it, lass. He finally said with a sigh. I can't afford to turn down 3 more blades at our side. Not for a mission like this. And all whelps must eventually grow their own wings. The winter blossom technique puts you on par with most veteran knights already. We all turned to look north, where General Zong had sent us coordinates for the nearest might forge the city knew about. A place listed as the flooded temple of Ordritz, and the hollow forest that stretched around it.